the chair to the Suffolk EU Alliance to welcome you to the Council, an amazing facility that we have here in Halesworth. And before we start, I have 3 F's, but not quite. Phones, foam, and funds. Can I ask you first of all to turn your phones off? Just check. The foam is the extinguishers. They're placed all over the building. This is your main exit to get out on Alliance Airways this morning. And there's another exit there. And funds only going to stay at once. We can only run on the fact that everybody is involved and they'll do their bit. So this morning, if you see a little bucket, you can put something sensible in there, that would be great. And if you take home one of our sponsorship bags, that's even better. Thank you very much. When I consider the amount of attention that we're putting into where we are this morning, I find it quite amazing. I think it is really my second job and my second life. And I'm sure you will feel the same. And 2 years ago, when we started on the journey, we never thought that 2 years later that we were sitting here this morning. So first of all, I have to commend you all for being here and getting out of bed. It's obviously very important to you. I hope in the audience that we have some Brexiteers, because we feel as an alliance that people are coming towards us. So most of our speeches, of course, you will feel are in the melting pot about Lorraine, and maybe they are. But the people that you're going to hear from this morning are very passionate, and they come from all over East Anglia and beyond. You'll also hear some commercial breaks. After each speaker, a significant speaker, we have some impact statements of what's happening locally, and that's very important too. I'm delighted to say that Anne Pettifer, who is an economic commentator, and she works and supports the Labour Party in giving them their information. She was with us this morning, and she's going to top and tail questions and answers from each speaker. And I'm very privileged to have her here, because normally she's not hanging out in Halesworth, she's in much more remarkable places. So thank you for that. The Alliance has come about because we're bothered. It was a very small margin, and if the boot was on the other foot, it would be quite a different story. As the chair, I realise I'm not on my own, and I want you to know that you are not on your own in how you're feeling. When you're talking to the radio, walking around in the kitchen, you're suffering from disbelief. Where we find ourselves is infinitely more sophisticated and difficult than any of us ever imagined. So I now need you to really hold on to that belief, and I need you to get out there and start putting the pebble in the pond and getting other people to be galvanised. Last Tuesday I went to a meeting at the Queen's Centre, which is opposite Parliament, and all the Julia Ewarts of the country were there. There were 500 people who represent these sort of alliances who were all there. We sit, and I'm explaining this to contextualise things really, so that you realise there's a lot going on. We sit under some remarkable groups, one of whom Lord Deben is representing this morning, and that's European Movement. They're really strong, significant groups, and they're now coming together. So if you wonder if this has all been rather disparate, it has, but it is coming together, and many people are supporting. There are millions of you all over the country doing this, and I just want you to hold on to that fact, because we as an alliance are trying to gather the information and the intelligence so that if things shift, if we're required, we can work together. I ask you today to either become a member or a follower, but I also want you to speak to your friends in Gloucestershire and in Scotland and in Wales and ask them to do the same locally, just because then if we're together, it's easier. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Anyway, we've got a really busy morning. I hope you enjoy. Please stand up and speak. There'll be 2 microphones running up and down to ask some questions. You've got to try and be timely. And therefore, I should like to introduce you to Lord Deben. And I'd ask him to enjoy what he has to say this morning. I was privileged to hear him speak just before the referendum. It was captivating.
Clearly, I fear not captivating enough. Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here and to see so many people here in Halesworth. I am very clear in my mind that you don't take the view that things are over until they are actually over. So I start very clearly by saying it is not a done deal. We are not necessarily going to leave the European Union. Every time I'm admonished by the powers that be, and that's quite a lot, they say, well, no, it's, we're going to leave. And I say, oh no, we're not. And nothing worries them or upsets them more than those words. Why do you think the Brexiteers are so determined all the time to make it look as if we can't go back on the decision which was made in a referendum of one man, one vote, once? That is what they do in African dictatorships. And that's not what we do here. So I start because I want to say something about Britain and Europe. Britain is naturally part of Europe. It is our home. It is our history. It is our geography. It is our culture. It is our religion. All those things that have made Britain were not things that made Britain alone. They were the things that made the community which we know as Europe. And the idea that you can pull this little island, these little islands, all but Ireland, out into the middle of the Atlantic and think that somehow or other we will make new and more worthwhile contacts is to deny our history and to deny our geography and to deny our culture and to deny all that has made us what we are. If you go round the Prince's Chamber, which is in the House of Lords, and you enter just the sort of ante-room to going into the House itself, and you look at all the pictures which were painted there in the middle of the 19th century to tell you about the history of our country, you cannot be other than impressed by the number of those paintings of people who influenced our country coming from the rest of Europe. It is what our history is. It's what our monarchy is. Everything about us, when you touch it, reminds us that we have never been an isolationist nation. We had a great period as an empire, but during the whole of that imperial period, our focus had to be on Europe because it was the nearest place to us, because that's where so much of our trade was even then concentrated. And if you looked at the Great Exhibition, you saw not only the number of exhibitors there who came from the rest of Europe, but you also saw how much the rest of Europe gained from what they learnt at the Great Exhibition. So I have never understood, and I admit that this is a gap in my comprehension, I've never understood those who feel that once you cross the channel, you move into an alien world. You can only do that if you have no history, if you have no geography, if you have no culture, if you have no understanding of what our country has been, is, and will be. And I also don't understand those who keep on talking about how much we will gain by leaving the European Union. Because I don't start there. I start by asking how much will we not be able to give if we leave the European Union. Britain has a historic role in that union. You can go through dozens of examples, things which would not have happened if Britain had not taken the lead. Now, of course, we have an unhappy history as well. I remember becoming the Secretary of State for the Environment. My predecessor was a Eurosceptic and voted to leave in the recent vote and continues to fight for Brexit. And the very first week I was there, I looked at my diary and I said, I'm very full, just come from agriculture where every moment was used. Oh, they said, well, there's nothing very much on this week, Secretary of State. There's, of course, there's the European Council on Wednesday and Thursday, but we don't go to that. Oh, at least they said, we do go when we've got something to tell them. Oh, I said, you get a long way that way, don't you? I said, may I make it absolutely clear that for me, the most important job I do is to go to the European Council. And I want to go there as a matter of course. I want my junior ministers to be there as well. And we fight for England, Britain, in the European Council. But we also fight for Europe in the European Council, because that is the basis where our small nation can make a real difference and can change the world, and that's what we're going to do. So will you please book the tickets now, and I want to know who in this department is in charge of it. Well, there wasn't anybody. 24 hours later there was somebody, and that was it. And when I got there, I turned to the two people who were flanking me. I said, what do the Spanish think about this? Thinking that from my long experience in agriculture, I knew the Spanish were on our side on this particular issue. Oh, well, we really haven't talked to the Spanish since before Christmas. This was July, June. And then I turned to the other side and said, what do the Portuguese think about this? And the answer was that they hadn't talked to them at all, as far as I could understand. Now, I come from a council where we talked all the time. If ever there were an issue that really was a European issue, it was agriculture, and we worked very closely together. My wife has cooked breakfast for every minister who I related with, because we always made sure we made friends, because that's the way you get friends when you need them, and you don't make them just in the middle of some sort of crisis. So I can genuinely say that in the 16 years I negotiated on behalf of this country in the European Union, we never lost a single vote that mattered to us. Never. Because we had built a relationship with our neighbours, which meant that the views that we had were views which we were able to convince them. And it meant that we didn't play frivolous games. We didn't do what the Daily Mail said we should do here, there and everywhere. We chose those things which were important to us, and we were willing to help the other countries with the things that were important to them. So when the Portuguese came to me and said, as Fisheries Minister, look, I'm in real trouble because we've run out of cod for Easter. And those of you who know Portugal know that salted cod for Easter is essential. It's like running out of turkeys for Easter here. He said, do you have any cod? And I said, well, actually, I do have 10,000 tonnes of cod, which we're not going to use this year. It just happened to be true, out of our quota. And I gave them to him. Never lost the Portuguese vote again during the whole period that I was there. But that's because he wouldn't have asked me if it hadn't been essential, and I wouldn't have asked him if it hadn't been essential. So when we got to the stage of the poor old Belgians saying that it was really unfair that the single market was interrupted by the British because we wouldn't allow the export of live horses in order that they could provide horse meat for Belgium. Now, I have to admit this has always been a problem for me. Never quite understood the whole issue about horses, but I knew that that was crucial in Britain, and I knew that if there were one thing that would make sure I'd get sacked as Minister of Agriculture, it would be if I gave way on this. So, but on the other hand, it was obviously nonsense and against the rules of the single market. We are supposed to be able to sell across the market. But it was a rather special issue, and we allow horses to be exported as long as they're worth more than £200, I think is the figure. That's the way you do it, you see. Anyway, the Belgians were busy going round, and we made sure that as many of our colleagues could come and stay with us over the forthcoming 3 or 4 months. And over breakfast, my wife would say, well, I'm not there. Well, it's very hard for John, very hard for you. Really, it really will mean he would have to go if we can't find a way through on the horses. So by the time she'd got them, she's a powerful lady, by the time she'd got them, I won the vote overwhelmingly, entirely against the real rules, but actually against the real politics. Because it's always true that in the European Union, people's real politics, national interests, come to the fore. And that's right, because we are an association of nations. We're not a federation. And when people talk about it as if it were becoming a federation, I have to say to you, no, it isn't. I'm not myself unaware of the advantages of such a step, but I know what's happening. And when you are judged that, what's happening is you get a closer and closer relationships between nations. And their different parts of their history can in fact be extremely helpful to the generality of talking. I find the very strong social attitudes of the French really valuable in today's world, where we're beginning to recover an understanding that the fraternité in a British sense is really important. We're learning that, all the business I do in business, helping companies to understand that that is what sustainable development is about. We have a lot to learn from them. And so that's why I was so angry when I discovered that the attitude of my predecessor was to say we went there only when we had something to tell them, as if we never had anything to learn from the rest of Europe. And for me, so this is why I believe this whole battle to be a life and death struggle. It's not because I have a particular love of the structure of the EU, although I must say it is a structure which has grown over the years. It is an organic structure. It is a mechanism we have brought together. With all its failings, it has created something which is the most important free world and peacetime creation that we have ever done. It's too good to lose. And the reason it is a life and death struggle is that I think it's a life and death struggle for this country. I think we have released in this country some of the most horrible aspects and attitudes which most of us had thought were not here. I believe that the Daily Mail is one of the most wicked influences. I am not surprised to know that the grandfather of the present, or great-grandfather of the present owner, wrote to Hitler promising his support, not in 1936 or 37 or even 38. He wrote in 1939 that that was the position of him and his newspaper. Don't forget, this has always been the destructive attitude, and it brings out all the ungenerous attitudes that are in any nation, but have to be kept below the surface while the good things are found. Our job is to take hold of the good, to think on those things. This is a biblical demand. That's what we're supposed to do. Not try to stir people up to hate people who don't happen to come from their own particular background. And what is a man with a name like Farage doing, talking about being British? How is it that people whose uncertainty derives from the fact they do not really feel right here? I have been looking into my background to see whether I had any Irish. Knowing the fact that I tend to remain a British subject, but I want to be a European citizen as well. I have got any Irish ancestors. I've got no foreign ancestors back to the 16th century, which is as far back as I can go. And my wife, who can go back to the 17th century, she's got none either. And one of the reasons I think we are passionately British is because we are entirely British. And they therefore feel secure enough to say this country isn't losing by sharing, it gains by sharing. And I don't want to be overly theological, but actually that is what's true, deep down true. If you try to keep what you've got, you lose it. If you share it, it grows. It's a capitalist bit too, if you want that. You don't do much good if you don't do much investment. There's no way in which you grow that way. I often think of that wonderful parable of the man who got the 10 talents, and the one who got the 5 talents, and the one who got the 1 talent. The one with the 1 talent thought, well, I'm going to be in awful trouble if I lose it, so I'll dig a hole and put it in there. And the others speculated, probably sensibly, and came back to their master with very much more than they started. And the master was furious with the one who hadn't done what he should have done with what he got. And it's that central issue which we need to say in Britain. If we remove ourselves from the European Union, what we're doing is that we're saying we're not going to do what we could do with what we've got. We're not going to do what we could do with our knowledge of the world, with our knowledge of our history, with the abilities of our scientists. I see somebody from science, the organisation doing so well, science and the EU. We're not going to contribute. And I don't want my children to belong to a nation that doesn't contribute. That's the question for the future. Now, the nature of Halesworth is that we're all, not all, but most of us, a bit older than the average. It's very important we speak up, because I don't want it to be said that all old people want us to leave the European Union. A lot of old people who want us to leave the European Union, and they should be ashamed of themselves. And in this county, I have to say I have a number of friends who have discovered that their children no longer speak to them because of that decision. And what the children have said is, it's all right for you because you will be dead and we will not be. That's what they've said. And the truth is, in our family, we have banned conversation of Brexit over the dinner table because we all shout at each other, and then suddenly I have to say, look, why are we shouting at each other? We all agree on all these subjects. And if we want to be angry, let's be angry about the people who don't. But stop arguing. No point. And that's what I want you to do. You see, one of the problems we have is that people give up. One of the problems we have is that people think it can't be done. I don't see how. It seems so difficult. Why on earth is the Labour Party not opposing it in this way? Why aren't there more people voting Liberal Democrat? Why don't the sensible Conservatives stand up to the loonies? All that is what in the back of our minds we're thinking, and whichever party you belong to, you've all thought all those three thoughts. So I want to take you back to Rorke's Drift. I want to take you back to what is supposed to be Britain's imperial history. I want to remind you that the people who fought at Rorke's Drift were not all Englishmen. They were Irishmen. They were people from the continent. And they were in Rorke's Drift. And there were hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of Zulus coming to destroy that camp. And they had 100 or so. And no one who was sane could possibly have believed that they could win. But they said the alternative was so bad that they would fight to the last man. And they did. And they won. I want us to think that now. Except I want man and woman. I think we have to remember that the alternative of leaving the European Union is very clear. Now, that of course is in itself a commendation, because the leavers never had a story of what they would do, which is why poor Monsieur Barnier, who's a friend of mine, Monsieur Barnier is right to say, I don't know what the British want, because the British don't know what they want. Mr. Fox thinks everything will be all right. He doesn't have to argue or give any facts or figures, because it'll all be okay. Mr. David Davis, who's a singularly more intelligent man, has decided to keep his card very close to his face, but I'm not sure there's any cards there. Andrea Leadsom appears to have faded. And Mr. Gove has other things to do, and is doing them remarkably well. Hope he will keep on with the countryside. But there won't be much countryside if we leave the European Union. If any farmer is here, or anybody who knows a farmer, just recognise that the longest serving Minister of Agriculture says this: the British Treasury will give nothing to the agricultural community. After we leave, if we leave, there will be a short period when there will be a certain amount for what will be called public goods. But after that, the £3 billion that comes into the countryside will be taken away. They've always wanted to do that in the Treasury, and they will have to do it after Brexit because we won't have the money. So even if they change their minds, the idea that there will be a continuing flow of support to our farmers is, it seems to me, entirely untruthful. But what will happen is that they are in such a mess that they will be trying to get free trade areas with the United States. Mr. Trump is not the ideal person to be trying to negotiate. But remember, the first thing he will demand is the free entry into this country of subsidised food from America. And America has the biggest subsidy bill of any country in the world. By farm, they subsidise farmers more than anyone else. So when you hear about the European Union, just remember, the Americans do it even more. So don't think that the countryside is going to be anything other than significantly poorer. I have two other things to say about why we have to fight. We live in a very dangerous world. We are, after all, minutes away from nuclear devastation, not just in North Korea, but the fastest growing nuclear weaponry is in Pakistan. And Pakistan, we understand, has provided nuclear weapons for Saudi Arabia. The Americans, although they deny it, have supplied nuclear weapons to Israel. We live in a world where we could be struck in a way which none of us have taken into account. So we live in a world where our role, our ability to negotiate, our standing there, particularly when Mr. Trump can't, is crucially important. But we can't do that just as Britain, pretending we are where we were in Victorian days. We can only do that with the strength of the European Union, the largest trading group in the world, a union which we have led almost since we went into it, and now certainly did until we went down this ridiculous path. So we cannot allow our exit from the European Union, because it means exit from so much of the influence that we have in the world. And the last thing I want to say is this. Our young people have grown used to the freedom of travelling everywhere in the rest of Europe. You have all grown used to buying food in lorries which come across with no trouble, go back the other way with other things. All of us live in Europe. We holiday in Europe. We have our European friends. I bet there's not a single person here who has not been served in a restaurant, looked after in a care home, nursed in a hospital, helped again and again by people from the rest of Europe. We have full employment. If they go, those restaurants, those hotels, those hospitals, those farms, those things that matter to us will no longer be able to provide the services we want. That may sound selfish, but it also means that those people who have gone home will lose the advantages which we have been able to give them, and will cease to pay the taxes which overwhelmingly are greater than any cost they are to us. So my last point leads on just for that, but is very, very short. If I came here and was rude about black people, I'd be run out and arrested. If I were rude about people from Poland, in many meetings I'd get cheered. I've never done it because I employ Poles. We wouldn't be clean in London without Poles. There's no one else. Wouldn't get the building done without Poles. There isn't anyone else. It's not that they take other people's jobs. It's that there aren't any other people to take those jobs. That's what our employment, our rising employment, even through the depressional period after the bankers collapsed, we increased our employment. So let's just say something which is British. And that is, of course we love our native country best. But remember what Tennyson said. That man's the first cosmopolite who loves his native country best. You start here. You love your people. You do not look for the most ungracious, unpleasant, nasty element in your society. You support the best. And in supporting the best, you see what we can do for our neighbours, whether they are near or far. And that leads you to be very concerned, to show people that others from other countries and other attitudes help you, because you learn, and because by learning you become a better person, more able to help others. That's why we have to stay in the European Union. That's why we need aid to the developing countries. That's why we have to fight climate change. It's because we're that sort of nation. We're a country that believes in itself and doesn't want to cut itself off from the rest of the world.
How long
minutes, and I see a woman in the back there with her hand up first. Please, and what I'd like you to do is tell me who you are and where you're from. And then a gentleman, hang on a minute, a gentleman in front of her, and then a gentleman here. Then we'll have three, and then we'll go back again.
My name's Janet, I'm from Halesworth. I don't know how many people here are from Halesworth. This is fantastic because I went on my own to the London demonstration in September. I went on my own to the Manchester demonstration in October, and I went on my own to the Cambridge demonstration in October. And they were all fantastic, but every one of those demonstrations was much too small. So it is fantastic to see in my own town so many people turn up. It's fantastic. But I have one question. Some of you might know me on Twitter.
Please, can we have your...
Yeah, I'm coming to it. I'm called Auntie Janet on Twitter, for those of you who go on Twitter. And I'm mad about this European. One thing I do not understand, and I think it's very important to understand it, I understand the people in some northern town where Poundland is left.
I think we...
Sorry, I'm coming to the question. I am coming to the question. I can understand poor people who hate immigrants in some northern town that Poundland is left. What I think is very important to understand is what motivates our opponents. And I don't mean those people, I mean the leaders. I mean people like
What motivates our opponents?
What is it? What is it that we are fighting? What is it that they really want?
Okay, thank you. The gentleman in front of you, Janet. Have you... Yeah?
That's what their motivation is, the leader's motivation. What they're trying to do is wrong.
Okay, we heard you, Janet. We heard you.
Hello, Chris Bennett from Woodbridge.
Yeah.
Ever closer union. That's the one thing that sort of niggles in the back of my mind. That's all my question.
So what is your question? What is your question, though?
No, it is.
You've got it. Well done, Noreen. Nice. Over here.
Adrian Knott from Silent, and I'd like to lead on from that. We've been reading How to Stop Brexit, which is excellent, by Nick Clegg, and I'd like to ask you how you regard what I find an excellent idea of the concentric circles which could be achieved in the European Union from cooperation with the countries which want great cohesion and that sort of thing, and the ones which want less. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for a wonderful speech, John.
Thank you. Can I ask one question as well, Lord Deben? Do you think there will be a second referendum? Should we prepare for one, and how should we prepare for one?
Well, they're like easy questions, aren't they? What motivates our opponents? Well, it's a pretty wide range of things. There are some people on the extreme right who call themselves free marketeers, and what they don't like is that there are any restrictions on trade of any kind. When you press them as to what those restrictions they don't like are, they have a number of different views, but they sometimes allow the cat to come out of the bag. And Jacob Rees-Mogg, for example, said how much better we would be without all our health and safety restrictions. He said that just before Grenfell Tower. They hate any kind of restrictions. And yet they don't understand that if you have a free trade market, which is what they also want, then you have to have agreements between the countries as to the terms on which that happens. And I have negotiated. It's all right for them. They haven't negotiated for them, and I have. When I was president of the European Union, because it was our turnaround, for a year, because I did it when the Luxembourger was not able to do it, so I had 2 terms, and I negotiated the Uruguay round with the United States. Absolutely no question of a free trade area. We would have to accept their subsidised food. And without that, there was no deal, because the political effects of the farming lobby on both political parties was too great. Now we have a president who doesn't believe in any of these things and wants to put America first. So this chimera that somehow or other we're going to be able to do free trade deals without removing our bans on all sorts of things. Do you want chlorinated chicken? Do you want food, meat, which has been filled with hormones because it's been so badly kept? Do you want to have cotton coming into this country which is so heavily subsidised that it's driven the cotton producers of Africa out of the market? Do you want to have a situation where the so-called British firm Tate and Lyle will be importing American subsidised sugar into this country in order that the British sugar will not be able to compete? Yet no sugar may get into the United States because the Cuban-driven refugee people who run the American sugar industry have managed to get that nice little corner for themselves. So don't think that they will get what they want, but that's what they believe, mainly because they have an unhealthy relationship with the extreme right of the Republican Party in the United States of America. And then there are others who are nearly blind because they really feel that somehow or other the British Empire could be resurrected. And they talk about the English-speaking nations. I find them the most pathetic and saddest, because that will not happen. The last thing I want to say is there are some people, and there are a lot of them who have put money into it, who want to make money. Mr. Murdoch does not want his newspapers to be properly kept under control in the European Union. He said, when I go to Brussels, no one listens to me. When I go to Westminster, they all do. That's why he wants it.
We must wrap up.
Ah, well, very difficult. I never say whether I think there will be another referendum. I don't say that because I have no idea how this is going to pan out. All I do know is that we won't win unless we know we can win. And we have to be ready to win. Yes. So it's no harm at all you building, and not harm, it's the absolutely essential thing, building up the kind of grassroots troops that whatever happens, we can win. Now it may be that we'll all have a rainbow collection of parties to vote for. It may be in different places we'll vote differently, because there will be nothing else more important if it were an election. It may be that there is a second referendum. It may be that we will have to show our strength so much that the present Parliament will come to the conclusion that it isn't possible to achieve what is on the table because it isn't acceptable. I don't know. Ever closer union. Ever closer union is a phrase which has been there from the beginning. It has been a good phrase because it has always made people think, can we do this better together? It doesn't mean federalism, and let's remember that federalism in Germany is a protection of local autonomy. So they don't even use the word in the same way as we do, because the Länder use federalism as a means of stopping Berlin being too powerful. And so don't get caught up on what the Germans say, because they mean something different. Ever closer union is something which is perfectly reasonable unless you interpret it in the most extreme way. Ever closer union doesn't say we are going to become a United States. It specifically doesn't say that. Ever closer union says to people just one thing. Before you try to do something on your own, can we do it better together? And we can't do things.
Lord Deben ago, I threw the schedule under the bus, okay? It's going to be like that, and it's really important that we get to ask the questions. I want you to be very fluid. Can you remember there are only 3 people making coffee out there? Can you be accommodating each other? We're not going to break, we're just going to keep going. If somebody needs to squidge out to go to the loo, grab a coffee, keep going. I'm just going to squidge this round. Tom Drake has very kindly come ever such a long way. He's representing the Lib Dems. I'm very proud to be a Lib Dem now. I'm not going to make this part political, but the point is that there's only one getaway truck, and we can talk about that, and they're here today. Tom Drake, MP, thank you very much.
Before I start, Junior, I should establish how much time I've got. But I'd like to leave some time for questions as well, so I'll try and keep it to 10 minutes. So I'm here really to talk about exit from Brexit. That's what, as a party, we're campaigning for. And why do we want to achieve that? Well, when I started driving around the M25 at 6:30 this morning, and I had the chance to listen to Farming Today, and one of the farmers was talking about the fact that he has chosen, because of the feedback he is getting, to remove the British flag from his produce, because the feedback he's getting from the continent is that is not entirely helpful. He is also now thinking about relocating his operation to the European Union, because that is his principal market. And then shortly afterwards in that programme, they were talking about the trade deals. They just heard something about trade deals. The trade deals where, for instance, often what is talked about is the trade deal that, for instance, America and Australia struck together, where this is produced as an example of a trade deal that can be done very quickly, where the government, people like Liam Fox, talk about, well, it was done in 18 months. First of all, that is untrue. It wasn't done in 18 months. There was a huge amount of preparation that went on before the talks on that trade deal started. And secondly, if you talk to any Australian now about that trade deal, what they will tell you is that it was absolutely rubbish for Australia, because you had America, large, powerful, wanting to extract certain things as part of that trade deal, and they were the bigger power, and they managed to extract it. So when, or if in the future the UK is out of the EU and is trying to negotiate trade deals with America, who do you think has got the upper hand in those negotiations? Have we as a country, or have America? Clearly it is America that will have the upper hand in those negotiations. And what we heard, chlorinated chicken, hormone-fed beef, or indeed lamb from New Zealand. Now, New Zealand is often given as an example by the Brexiters, and I think Brexiteers sounds too much like Buccaneers and it sounds almost positive, so I stick to Brexiters. They often talk about New Zealand. Well, the standards, the animal welfare standards in New Zealand are very different to ours. I was talking to someone from the Meat Processing Association who was saying what happens in New Zealand if a lamb or a sheep dies is they dig a hole and they stick it in the ground. And so their standards are very different. Someone from the Meat Processing Association was visiting what is apparently the exemplary farm in New Zealand, and he was talking to the farmer and he was singing the praises of all the good things that he did, and the farmer then said, well, we are the lambing season, I think we'll go up to some field, but I must warn you that there might actually be quite a lot of dead sheep up there, because I haven't been there for 12 days. Right, so this is the lambing season, the farmer hasn't been there for 12 days, and this is apparently the exemplary farm in New Zealand. So if our government think that striking trade deals with countries like America or New Zealand are going to be beneficial, I think they need to think again, and they particularly need to think about the impact this would have on people like our hill farmers. And I know that in Wales they are very, very worried about this. Now, why am I pro-European? Well, first of all, I lived in France for 10 years. I've got lots of French friends, spent a lot of time in France, a lot of time in Portugal. And what I have found really quite shameful is how people I consider to be our friends from these different countries now view the United Kingdom. They've always thought of us as being a a friendly, welcoming, open country. This is no longer the case. Whether it's Scandinavian diplomats, French, Germans, they all look at us and think and say to me, what on earth are you doing? Why are you doing this? What do you think you're going to benefit? What benefits are you going to derive from this? And I can't find any benefits. Obviously, I'm a Liberal Democrat and talk rather pessimistically about what we are trying to do. So when Britain, or when our Prime Minister and others talk about a global Britain, what I throw back in their face is, do you know that EU citizens have set up support groups to counsel EU citizens who are worried about their future here? So far from being a global Britain, we have created a Britain in which people I consider to be our friends now feel uncomfortable and in some cases have to seek counselling because of the uncertainty that our Prime Minister has created for them. She had an opportunity right at the outset to give unilaterally rights to EU citizens. That is what we pressed her to do. It was to our advantage. It still is to our advantage for the simple reason that we have roughly 3.2, 3.4 million EU citizens here, and there are roughly 1.2 million UK citizens, 1.2 to 1.5 million UK citizens who live in the EU. So really, we can be certain that if we offer rights to the 3.2 million EU citizens here, which is the right thing to do, the other countries are going to reciprocate because they, in effect, have got more to lose than we have. So our Prime Minister should have delivered that and then have got rid of the worries that EU citizens have. Incidentally, 10% of the people who work in the NHS are EU citizens, and 10% of that workforce have already left. And we've seen a very sharp drop in the number of nurses registering to practice here from the EU. Now, there are a couple of reasons for that. I'll give you a very concrete example. My local hospital, St Helier Hospital, they used to take nurses from Spain, Portugal and Italy, but since the referendum, I would say partly as of the fact that we're now viewed as a country that is not particularly welcoming, but also because the pound crashed and therefore they were coming here to earn money, some of which was then being sent home. It's now not as attractive, so they're not coming. So what is my local hospital doing instead? They've got to recruit the nurses, we haven't got them here. And even if we undertook a major training programme, we probably won't have them for the next 4, 5, 6, 7 years. What are they doing? They are recruiting those nurses from Thailand, the Philippines, India. No problem with that. The difference is that they have to pay £1,000 a visa for those nurses, whereas if they came from the EU, there is no visa fee. So far from there being £350 million a week coming back to the NHS, on the contrary, at the moment, and I don't think there's ever going to be any money coming back from the NHS because our economy is going to shrink as a result of us leaving the EU rather than grow, actually we're incurring additional costs because of our decision to leave. And of course we haven't left yet, and if we leave I think the impact will be even greater. A couple of weeks ago I visited a business in the constituency. They print labels, and they said, we really regret, we thought that we were pro staying in the EU, we thought that we would win the referendum. I never thought that, incidentally. And on the 23rd of June last year, just before then, we had to make a decision about whether to buy this really complex piece of printing equipment, which is about from here to the banner there, that had 8 separate rolls to do different colours and so on. We decided, do we buy before the referendum, do we buy afterwards? Okay, we're going to win, doesn't matter, we'll buy afterwards. Delaying that by a couple of weeks has cost them £50,000 as a result of the pound crashing, them trying to buy this equipment in pounds, and it has cost them an arm and a leg. And just to increase the pain on them, the raw product that they use for this printing process, which is large rolls of labels that they get, they can only source in the European Union. They can't get them in the domestic market. So when the government say it's fine, people will simply buy the stuff in the United Kingdom, it is not true, they can't. The price of their raw product has gone up by 20%. 20% extra in terms of the cost for running their business that they have now got to try to absorb. So we've already seen some of the hard impact that Brexit has had. I think it is possible for us to secure, please don't call it a second referendum, anyone who's talking about it, it's a vote on the deal, or a vote on the facts. This is not a rerun of the 23rd of June 2016. This is a vote on what we now know to be the case. And what we now know to be the case is that there is now a huge problem, you're going to hear from an Irish speaker shortly, a huge problem on the Northern Ireland border. No one I have met so far here, amongst the DUP MPs, when I visited Northern Ireland a couple of weeks ago, has got a solution that ensures that there is a completely seamless border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. It is impossible to achieve. That is a real risk. I visited a community called Falk Hill in South Armagh, which was right in the middle of a bandit territory as it used to be known. At one point, they had a garrison of 3,000 soldiers for 24,000 inhabitants. They said that it was the most militarised place in Western Europe during the Troubles period. They are worried that if there is any sort of control on that border, even if it's not a permanent position, a post, but ad hoc checks, one vehicle in 100, you've got to have checks. If we're outside the customs union, you've got to check every now and again what is inside a vehicle. You can't let them all through. If there are those checks, even if it's a mobile check, if you've got British customs officers, British police, British army on that border, that gives the IRA the excuse, because they will see that as being a reversal, a backward step in terms of achieving a united Ireland, and that community are worried that they could see a resumption of the troubles that hurt them so hard a few decades ago. So that is a real challenge that our government do not have an answer for, and one thing we must not let them do, and this is something we've got to fight, we must not let them blame the European Union for that particular problem. It's not up to the EU to sort out the huge mess that our government have made on that border. We have to find a solution. I don't think there is one, but certainly the EU should not be blamed. The other issue, when we have the vote on the deal, people will know that there's a major problem on that border. The other thing that they will know is that there is a settlement bill. This is not the European Union punishing the United Kingdom. This is the European Union holding the UK to the commitments that we have made to invest in a certain number of projects and an ongoing programme. Now, what that figure is going to be, we don't know, but a figure of 40 billion, that sounds likely. And therefore, and I think this is the real problem that Theresa May has got. She is really in a very difficult place. Whether that leak about her begging them to help her or not was accurate, and I do wish that there was one thing the Europeans could do, is they could shut up Mr. Juncker, because frankly his contributions to this debate are not very helpful. But she has got behind her a number of very prominent Conservatives who were over their dead body, will we hand £1 to the European Union. She knows that if she wants the talks to make any progress at all, she has got to concede a figure, and it will probably be somewhere between 20 and 40 billion pounds. At the point she does that, she will have an explosion on the backbenches behind her. But again, that is her problem. She and her predecessor, David Cameron, have foisted this upon us, and they have got to find a solution, and I don't think they've got one. So we are trying to get a vote on the facts, a vote on the deal. People will hear, will see those sorts of problems, will start to hear, I expect, from businesses the impact it has on them. They will hear from their local hospital the impact it's had on staffing. They will hear from businesses in the meat processing industry. 80% of the people who work in that industry are from the EU. If we don't, and they're in parts of the country where there is low unemployment, they cannot source that workforce from anywhere else. So what are they going to do? Shut up their plants. That's one option, I suppose. And often, overwhelmingly, the vets who work in those places are also from the EU. So any number of sectors are going to be very, very badly affected by this. Now, I just want to finish perhaps with a couple of concrete things that we can all do, because it's great to have rallying speeches, but actually we then need to move away from that and do something concrete. So going on marches, brilliant, it raises the profile. Outside there is a Liberal Democrat stall. It could have been a Labour stall, might have been a Conservative stall, could have been a Green Party stall, and on that, go, if you haven't already been, go and make a note of 4 amendments. There are 4 amendments that are going to be debated in the EU withdrawal bill. We've got the first 2 days in committee on the 14th and 15th of November. And one of those amendments is about the meaningful vote. In other words, giving us, parliamentarians, a meaningful vote. Not the vote that Theresa May has offered us, which is either you accept the deal, however bad it is, or we drop out of the European Union, which would be absolutely catastrophic. That is not a meaningful vote. We want a vote that would enable Parliament to say to government, well, what you've negotiated is hopeless, go back and try again. Or, from our point of view, it would actually be a meaningful vote that said you can vote to stay in the European Union as an alternative. So that's one of the amendments. There's an amendment about staying in the single market. So if we have to come out of the EU, let's try and stay in the single market, because that is what enables our businesses, any manufacturer, any food producer here, to produce a product that they know is not going to be blocked by some arbitrary rule or regulation by any of the 27 EU countries. So there's an amendment about staying in the single market. There's an amendment about EU citizens and securing EU citizens' rights. And some of those amendments that I've referred to are in fact led, the lead name on the meaningful vote is Dominic Grieve, who's a Conservative Member of Parliament, who has played a very important, and I hope will continue to play a very important role in pressing these amendments. And if any of you have any connections, any family, friends who live in his constituency, then by all means congratulate him on supporting or bringing forward those amendments, and really perhaps ensure that he doesn't backtrack on them, because very often what will happen is that amendments will be put forward, the government will come forward with some sort of minor concession which in reality doesn't really deliver anything, and will then say, I've secured a victory, and will then back off. He must not do that, because an amendment that has got 7 or 8 Conservative names on it, plus the opposition parties, is actually somewhere where we can force the government to change direction. It wouldn't stop Brexit, but what it would do is it would be, I think, psychological in actually being the first defeat that the government have experienced on this issue. And I think for us, collectively, that is what we need to see. So, as I said, out there, if it had been on a Labour stall, I'd have directed you there. If it had been on a Green stall, I'd have directed you there. This is very much a cross-party campaign. For the first time, I've got more mobile phone numbers for Labour MPs and Conservatives than I've ever had in the 20 years I've been a Member of Parliament. And that is because we are working together to try and ensure that we can stop Brexit, provide an exit for Brexit, and ensure that we all get a vote on the deal. So pick up that campaign. Make sure that, Therese Coffey, for instance, get her on board, because I'm sure that she... and this is the point that I will finish with. There are many Conservative members of Parliament, many Labour members of Parliament, who voted in the EU referendum because they knew that leaving the European Union would do us huge damage. I haven't changed my position. I'm openly campaigning against us leaving, albeit my constituency voted slightly in favour of leave. I believe that this will do us huge damage. I'm absolutely certain that Therese Coffey still believes that this will do us huge damage. We know the Prime Minister still believes it will do us huge damage, because she wasn't able to say that if there was an EU referendum now that she'd vote in favour of leave. So we need to hold them to account, and I hope that collectively we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. And can I just say that apparently Theresa Coffey will be here this morning, but she chose not to speak, but will be available for questions afterwards, as I understand. Now, are there any questions for Tom? I see 3 people in the front row. That seems a bit unbalanced to me. Are there any other questions? The gentleman with the beard had his hand up first, and then I'm going to point to that gentleman with dark glasses at the back a second, and the third in the front row. Sorry, the woman in the front row. Yeah, I beg your pardon, sir.
Thank you. My name's Dave O'Neill from Bungay, 7 miles up the road. We want a second referendum, or a referendum on the facts and the deal. Now the problem is the facts. We have a press that tells a lot of lies. A very McCarthyite press. How do we get the press to tell the truth and the BBC to tell the truth, because the BBC is so much in hot government?
Okay, thank you. The gentleman at the back. Your name, please, and where you're from. Yeah. Have you got a mic? Can we take a mic up to the gentleman at the back? Or could you speak very loudly?
Nigel Phipps from Britain, very uplifted by the talk, but one question.
Yes.
Decide not to exit. How many Europeans going to take it? Because we're an awkward partner. Euro, Schengen, money, endless. How right do we have that?
Okay. Right, thank you. And the third question here. Why don't you use mine? Thanks very much.
Christine Spear, Woodbridge, but Canadian, with a mother from Prague and a father from West Hartlepool. So nowhere. Thank you very much for your talk and for Lord Deben's talk. Very, very helpful, very interesting. At the very end, you brought up the most important thing for us, I think, is what we can do. We have tried with our MP here, with Therese Coffey, and just received a brush off with pie. My biggest surprise was the conversion for the Remain MPs immediately to leave and voting for Article 50 at that time. They could have even left it a bit later. What can we do to reverse that and to get those MPs that represent Remain constituencies to understand that we're still there?
Right, so some difficult questions. So first of all, how do we change our media's approach? Well, first of all, not all the media is in the category of the Daily Mail. I think that we have the potential through social media, which clearly played a very important part on the Leave side during the referendum campaign. We have the ability to do the same in terms of supporting our position. We must do that. And I welcome the fact that 3 of the leading campaign organisations, the European Movement, Open Britain and Better Britain, are going to start coordinating more effectively their campaigns, and we can then try and negate the spin that is put on this by some of our press. In relation to the European Union, I spent a lot of time in the last month or so talking to different diplomats, talking to members of parliament from different countries in the EU, and I'm reassured that so far, to a man and woman, they have all said that if the UK at any point were to say, actually, we've changed our minds, we are revoking Article 50, that they would allow the United Kingdom back in. Overwhelmingly, doesn't matter whether it's the Germans, the French, the Portuguese, the Scandinavians, they have all said the same thing. So I think that the difficulty is that the longer this goes on, then the risk is that there's a momentum that builds up and it becomes almost a done deal, and then their attitude may change. But at the moment, rock solid in saying, if we wanted to come back, or if we wanted to stay, as opposed to come back, we want to stay, they're happy to do that. And you can see why for certain countries. Germany, they are absolutely desperate, I would say, to maintain the triangulation of France, Germany and the United Kingdom. The Scandinavians see us as their allies. The Portuguese, who are diplomatically our longest allies around the world, they want us in there. So they would facilitate that. Now, how do we get the Remain Conservative MPs, and the Labour ones, frankly, a lot of them, how do we get them back on board? Well, I must say I'm very disappointed with the way they have all gone incredibly quiet. I shared a platform with Chris Philp, who's a Conservative Member of Parliament, who's in the seat neighbouring mine, Croydon South, during the referendum campaign. We were both speaking in favour of staying in the EU. He was an articulate advocate of us staying in. But since the vote, he's said and done absolutely nothing. Okay, I can't believe they can't hear me. Outside, I didn't realise I was projecting my voice for outside as well. I think what will happen, I think it's partly down to the polls, frankly, not the P-O-L-E, P-O-L-L, down to the polls. I think, and I've spoken to some Labour MPs about this, and if they see a consistent pattern that says month after month after month that Remain is now ahead, then I think that provides them with a bit of space in which to start, and they may feel obliged to, frankly, for them to start being a little bit more vocal in expressing concerns. It may also be that the reality, if the reality hasn't sunk home with them yet, it will do very soon in terms of the enormity of what the UK government is trying to undertake. I asked a parliamentary question a month or so ago just to ask the different government departments how many pieces of EU legislation in your department are there that you need to convert as part of the EU withdrawal bill into domestic law. They don't know. A month ago they did not know. The only figure I got back from a couple of departments was we think across the whole of government it's between 800 and 1,000 pieces of legislation. So individual departments do not know what legislation they're trying to convert, and we're starting the committee stage of the bill in 2 weeks' time. They don't know what legislation they're going to have to convert as part of that process. So if we start to see the polls shift, then I think we will start to see some Conservative MPs perhaps speaking out. And if they start to think that their electoral prospects are going to be very badly damaged, and I think they will, if we go through with Brexit, the long-term economic consequences for us are such that I think they as a party are going to be very badly damaged for the next 20 or 30 years, because people will see that they endorse something that has been a catastrophe. Then I think they will start to they'll start to talk, and at that point, if they think they're looking at a catastrophe after March 2019, they may be willing to endorse the idea of a vote on the deal, because at that point they will say, well, confidentially, behind closed doors, this is looking very bad for the UK. Do we really want to be seen to be the party that has endorsed this process? Why not allow the country to have a vote on the deal? Because then if the country votes for it, well, it's your fault, you voted for it. Or if the country votes against and says, well, actually, having now seen the consequences of this, we want to stay exactly where we are as part of the EU, then they may heave a sigh of relief saying, phew, that was a close run thing, how sensible that the will of the people voted for us to stay in the EU. Thank you very much.
Just going to make this a little more poignant, and we're going to put together a suite of our local residents whose lives are being affected currently. Virginie, can I ask you to speak first possibly? I'm not sure that Suzanne has arrived, so if you can make yourself available. And then moving on, please, try to pick up without trying to next.
Dennis.
It's rather a big thing to come and stand here, so Virginie will be...
But I've been having lots of things, right?
You're more than welcome to stay here if you wish, but it is very good.
So I'll go that way. Over there, it's turning.
So coming to the stage, Virginie Revere. Hello, I'm a French. I had a question for Tom, but he ran away. My question was what about changing the wit culture in this country, which is actually blackmailing and bullying. Is that real democracy? Yeah? Okay, so I'm a French citizen. I've been here since
October 2012. So that's something I'm not very sure. I wouldn't have the right of permanent residency if, as Theresa May previously said, you have to be in England for 5 years from the date of Article 50. So if that is right, I don't have the right to permanent residency. But we don't really know. So what I really dislike is this uncertainty. It's really unclear, and I want transparency. So I feel, my feeling was that when the results came out, that I was, as a foreigner, not wanted. It was really hurtful. And other friends, French, had the same feeling. And I actually felt that I am a scapegoat, complete scapegoat. Because all the campaign was run on immigration policies, saying that migrants come to Britain to tap its benefit system. And that is absolutely untrue. EU migrants come in majority to work. 81% of EU migrants in working age are here working, more than actually the English citizens of the same working age. So that's one thing. And I have a quite personal story, which is quite hectic, because I married an Englishman, and we lived 10 years in France. So there was 10% of the people living in my village were English. There was a really lovely community. I have lots of still English friends who had children, who were friends of my children, and I still see them. And there was 2 of them were actually part of the local council. So it felt really nice. I loved the English culture, and I studied English. And so when the couple broke down, the father left France and came to England, and I felt, I like the English culture, I can speak English, my children would adapt, okay, I'll come over, and so that the children can have parents in both countries. The trouble is, the father then didn't want to, I let him have the children for 1 year. I had French custody of the children in France. I let the children be residents with him for 1 year. And then he didn't want to let me have the children, even half the time. And so there was a moment where I wanted to take the children with me for the weekend, and he refused. I called the police, and the police said to me, I said to them, I have the custody for the children in France. There's a court order for it. And they said to me, French law doesn't apply in England, so you better leave, otherwise it's a breach of peace. And I was really shocked, completely shocked. And so we entered a judicial procedure, and thanks to the Hague Convention, yes, which is the European Council regulations, you can prevent abduction and retention of children. So actually, I am really, really glad that there's a European Court of Justice. And I want that to still... Second thing, I won the case. I had the right to have the children half the time. And that's only one part of it. Then the Home Office wouldn't give me child benefit for one child, which is, it said, yes, it's possible, but internal policies are against it. So that was another fight. It took 1 year. First, I felt like a second-rate citizen because for EU applicants, it takes 6 months before they deal with your case. And then, so it was a very long process. I won it again. But I'm wondering if, the thing is, I noticed that the police, with the jury at the court, EU regulations. So what I'm saying is instead of breaking everything, why don't we do what we have well and build on it? Because we don't know what we're going to have instead of that. There is zero transparency. So that's it. Well, I'm here, my children are here, so I'm going to stay here. I think I felt welcomed in the first place here. It's a nice community. And all I'm saying is you have to resist, really resist, and ask for the possibility to have a meaningful vote and the possibility to vote to remain.
Lady's life changed, and I'm so sorry, but we agree. Trevor. Dennis, you won out.
There's no need, I don't think I try to hide my accent, I'm Irish. Obviously not related to Lord Deben, although I'm sure like all of you, I was very, very inspired by what he had to say here this morning. I think it gives us hope, if you like. And the laws of unintended consequence, I think Virginie has illustrated exactly people's lives have been affected by this. And of course Tom Brake has touched on the unforeseen consequences, if you like, in relation to the Irish border. Unfortunately for Ireland, in fact, it wasn't an issue during the referendum campaign. Ireland has tremendous relationships with the UK government and they're in an extremely difficult position now, but that's a discussion for another time. Just to go very briefly through what my thought process is on this. We know with the Article 50 process that there was a lot of criticism of May taking 9 months to actually trigger the letter. But in fact, I think the more noteworthy aspect of the Article 50 letter was the sheer level of unpreparedness and lack of vision which was contained in that letter. Essentially, if you read it, it's based on the infamous Lancaster speech, and basically it's pretty much a sort of a wish list and a vision which is certainly not defined in the letter itself. Now we turn to the actual reality of the situation. We have David Davis telling us that the row of the summer was going to happen over the sequencing, but of course due to the nature and scope of the letter, of course, the EU already had, if you like, the initiative in terms of setting the agenda. So let's assume, we know of course what they don't want. They don't want to be in a single market. The government doesn't want to be in the customs union. They don't want the Norway EEA model. They don't want the Canadian model. They don't want the Swiss bilateral model. They don't, I think, even want Gove's Albanian model. They don't want any of these things. But what they do want is, and what they wish for is, a bespoke, very close relationship with the European Union. Well, I think this is where the difficulty arises. Let's assume that we make progress now in Christmas towards it. We get over the initial sequencing situation and arrive at what they call significant progress. Let's assume by the December Council. Then I think the real difficulties are going to come into, if you like, real focus. First of all, I think you have the problem that May and Davis, if you like, continue to give this impression that we can negotiate everything within 1 year. Essentially, that because we're 43 years, Britain's 43 years in the community, that we have what we call sort of regulatory equivalence, which has been built up over that period of time. But I think anybody reading what has been said in Brussels about Barnier has been constantly saying is that it's not going to be about convergence, it's going to be about managing divergence. And that, I think, is something that I think a lot of people don't understand. Britain will be a third country basically seeking to have whatever access it can negotiate with the EU single market. So I think that's going to be a huge problem. Secondly, I think a transition deal, which of course the government says it will only trigger once we know what the final shape of the relationship will be, that in itself is also extremely complicated. So basically, in a nutshell, I think what my view of the situation is, Barnier has been saying for every time you open a paper, Barnier has been talking about the infamous clock is ticking. Well, it is ticking. We lost a huge amount of time, obviously, with the triggering of the Article 50 letter, but the 2-year process started from that date. And as of now, Britain is leaving the EU on the 31st of March 2019. As I see, the only game in town at this stage, or as the next couple of months evolve, will be to seek an extension of the Article 50 deadline. Now, what I mean by that is that the 2-year clock ends on the 31st of March 2019. That will happen and Britain will be out of the EU on that date, whatever our dreams or hopes might be. And so I think the only way is to begin to think about how actually we could extend this Article 50 deadline. It's obviously too early and politically too difficult to talk about withdrawal at this stage. It would be extremely difficult to sell this to large elements of the British public, and it would be even more difficult to sell it to the EU 27, because this is something that there's one element in the EU want to get this thing done fairly quickly. There's another element in the hope that if the thing is strung out, that ultimately we might be able to actually stay in the long run. But I think it's important, in my view at this stage, to forget about the idea of a second referendum. You know, the government talks about the withdrawal bill, the transition deal and the final relationship all being negotiated by next October. That simply, and I talk to colleagues regularly in Brussels, that will not happen, including the issue of the repeal bill and, of course, potentially offering a deal to Parliament. This will all take a huge amount of time, and unless the clock is stopped or extended, and if you read papers by people like, or speeches by, say, the former Irish Prime Minister John Bruton, who's extremely knowledgeable about this area, he suggests an extension of 5 years, which is the kind of timescale we're talking about, of extending the Article 50 deadline. So, if you like, to conclude, colleagues, the irony is that if the government had prepared itself properly in the Article 50 process, done all the preparatory work, sorted out exactly what it is they wanted, well, in fact, we probably would be leaving on the 31st of March 2019. But there's a certain irony about the fact that they have actually messed it up to such an extent that now it does open up new possibilities of perhaps extending the Article 50 deadline. That's how I basically see as the only real option. People are talking about the future, but the clock is ticking. Thank you very much.
Trevor Gerrard on standby. So, as I said earlier, I threw the script under the bus. For those of you who live in the constituency, we know that we've got a challenge with Therese Coffey, and I have to say this morning, she's risen to the challenge. She'd like to speak to you this morning. I ask you to be gentle, but remember, we are here for a reason. Can I ask Therese Coffey and please come and say?
Well, hello, Julia, and thanks for that warm welcome. I'm sorry you have a problem with me. Like a lot of people in this room, although I don't know how many actually did, I campaigned for the United Kingdom to stay in the EU. But we lost. And I'm a Democrat. So it was close but decisive. So 1.3 million votes did. So meanwhile, continuing to be a minister in the government on the environment, one of the things that I'm involved in is about our future, about how we transition away from the European Union, working together on what we can still and will do together, but also that future now where setting out the principles that the Prime Minister has laid out in her initial Lancaster House speech, reinforced in her Florence speech, but in terms of the fact that UK Parliament will become sovereign, UK Supreme Court will be supreme, but also about working through about how we will continue to work with our European family. And when I speak to commissioners and I speak to other European ministers, the way I put it is we'll no longer be brothers and sisters, but we'll still be cousins. And particularly in things like the environment, particularly in things like security, it is absolutely right, and indeed trade, that we will continue to work together. Not only just across the continent of Europe, but also as a force for good in global discussions too. So whether that's about climate, whether it's about other issues of security. So in certain aspects, it's not, of course I know it's not going to be the same, but in many other ways we will continue to work as closely with our European Union friends as we do now. But I thought it'd be useful to perhaps have some Q&A. And it's a little bit difficult seeing people with the spotlight, but I'll do my best.
Okay, so I'm analytical, and I'm going to be managing the Q&A. Can we see hands, please? First of all,
Your mic's not working.
why is my mic? It is now. Can you hear me? Yes. Again, can you hear me now? Yes. There is a gentleman that's furthest back. I can hear you first. The lady in front, and this gentleman here. And then we'll do another round.
There'll be more rounds, don't worry.
Sorry.
It's okay, we'll take it in 3. It's fine.
And I'll stand here where I'll be able to see you better.
Gentleman, lady, gentleman.
Yeah. So first of all at the back. Yeah, please. Have you got a microphone? Can you speak very loudly, please? And the microphone on its way.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Going to take all questions. Let's just go.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Even closer? Right, okay, now, I'm rather tired of being...
Please, where you're from?
Richard Hare, Woodbridge. I'm tired of being told by politicians and social political commentators that this is some sort of overwhelming endorsement for your government to go ahead. Now, they did win. They won. But when 63% of the electorate didn't vote for it, it's a pretty high victory. I'm very sorry to see politicians like you rolling over and having your time to go.
But what is the question?
I'm making a statement that it's not a question.
To be fair, this is a Q&A session. There are people who ask questions.
That was the first lady. Second person was lady here.
Jane Long Simon. Have you spoken to John Gummer, and how do you answer his very persuasive arguments? Of great experience. I mean, he has experience on all those topics of working with Europe. I just find his case, you can't counter it. How do you manage to?
Thank you. And sir, your question. Yes. Oh, introduce mine.
Thank you very much. Michael Louis Peterson. Nice to see you this morning. Very surprised. You may recall we had a confrontation with the UK representatives in Felixstowe, very nasty, where you were virtually assaulted, and you actually took no action on that, which was of concern, in view of the feelings that many people have had since the referendum. My real question to you, I think, and all of the folk who are looking to get a better debate, is we've asked repeatedly what has the EU facilitated to be created in the UK out of the money that we send to them and we come back. We've had the £350 million on the side of the bus. What we've not got in our district is the fact that the Orwell Bridge, the feeds to the dock, the road system exists because of trans-European money that paid for more than half of both of those things. When we came up the A12 today to Halesworth, we saw pretty much what our future might be if we were going to rely upon the English treasury. Thank you.
So I'm not going to repeat the referendum. It's happened and Parliament has now voted to trigger Article 50. That's fact. So I don't know what John said this morning. Of course, I mean, John's my predecessor. I have spoken to him, but I don't know what he has said. I'm actively involved now. I attend the Environment Council, I attend other international conventions. I regularly meet with my ministerial counterparts. We're still members of the EU and we're still actively involved in negotiations. But also, this is the chance, and I'll do, speaking to other countries, so seeing how Switzerland, for example, undertakes its chemicals regulation scheme, so thinking about that. So there are different practicalities that are ongoing about how other countries, which aren't members of the EU, and aren't even members of the EEA, are working with Europe on these kinds of potential different standards. But underpinning a lot of what's called EU law, and which has already been transcribed into UK law, there are two different ways that they do that, are underpinning international conventions on things like the environment. So the precursor of things like the Habitats Directive is actually something called the Berne Convention. Now that has been supplanted by some legal cases, EU case law, and EU case law will continue to come across into the UK interpretation of all these regulations which are going to be put into UK law within the next 18 months. So, and in the future, it's been decided, if this bill goes through, that in effect it will only be the UK Supreme Court that will be changing those kinds of interpretations of case law that exist today. Now, let me finish answering Mike
I want
first.
to help you with what Lord Deben said. One of the things he said is that Her Majesty's Treasury will not provide the subsidies to farmers that are currently available to British farmers. That was a really big point of his speech there. Could you perhaps respond to that?
Well, we, in our manifesto commitment this year, and what we're fulfilling is that the approximately £3 billion that goes to support agri and agri-environment schemes will continue for the lifetime of this Parliament. We then need to make the case. We then need to make the case of how much we get in the future. And I thought a lot of people in this room would actually support the direction of travel which our department is flagging about putting more into the public good and environment rather than foregone income based on how much land you earn. So there's an element there about that. Now coming to Mike, yes, you're right. There has been funds which projects have bid into. I think £5 million came to help the Ipswich Court at the bacon factory. Now, the way things are changing within the European Union, it so happens right now the UK is not eligible for quite as much because a lot of the funds are going to some of the less developed countries in the European Union. So things like the A14, I think, have actually been taken off the list of eligible projects, but undoubtedly, yes, there have been. And they're normally accompanied, dare I say it, by the little logo. Indeed, in every field where there's European subsidy through the CAP, money coming back into the country, I think has to have one of these little flags. So there are visible reminders of projects of where EU funds have come back into the UK.
Can I,
there was some more people over here?
Can I ask?
There was a lady in the middle.
Hang on a minute. I'm chairing the questions, Theresa. Can I just say... Can I say there's no one statement and one question? So who's got a question? This gentleman had a question. This gentleman's got a question. And the woman at the back has got a question.
I'll tell you also, people of France. Michael's Pierre Woodbridge. I think Madame Coffey has had a few letters from me. I believe we live in a parliamentary democracy. Isn't democracy fighting for what you believe in? Yes. If you believe in what you said, you are a Remain supporter. Will you continue to use your common sense and fight for that and vote with the Tory rebels who we hope will overturn this ridiculous nonsense? Thank you.
And I live in the village of Bolton, just a mile from here, so very much within this constituency. Dr. Coffey, it sounded as though you were saying that democracy actually ended with that vote. Every time a general election is called, I have the right to change my mind. Everybody has a right to change their mind. When we all voted about this in the referendum, we made a decision. It was a very narrow majority, and I'm fed up with being told that democracy means that no matter how small the majority was, we've got to go along with it.
And your question?
And my question is, why can I not change my mind? Why can the country not change its mind? Why can Parliament not allow us a vote when we see what this actually means?
No, it's the lady in the back. Sorry. Yeah.
Name and where you're from. My name is Judith, I live in Halesworth. Not a dissimilar question. Dr. Coffey, do you think there should be a meaningful vote in Parliament when we know the terms of the deal? And will you vote with your conscience and on the evidence when that vote is taken?
Thank you.
So I'm confident that the UK government will negotiate a good deal with the European Union. But the deal will be put, there is, as has already been set out by the government ministers, David Davis and Prime Minister, that will be a meaningful vote. So that's there. In terms of, dare I say, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party both went into the 2017 elections saying they would respect the result of the referendum. You know, Jeremy Corbyn said, we're not going to be part of the single market. We're not going to be part of this customs union. And, you know, Labour and Conservative went into the election with both saying that. So, coming to democracy, Parliament decided, and I say I'm not going to repeat the referendum, that they would put this in or out decision to the people. And the decision was held, and the result may have been close, but if I also suggest the creation of the Welsh Assembly was decided by fewer than 8,000 votes. So that's what happened in their referendum. Fewer than 8,000 people was the difference between creating Welsh Assembly or not. So a decision has been made. I believe it is right that Parliament takes forward the expressed will, close but decisive, and move on with this process.
I think three more questions. This gentleman here, that lady over there, and this lady here.
Theresa, how will you vote?
Right. Can we have the microphone? Where is the microphone? Right. Thank you.
Bill Chaplin, Priti Patel constituency. Security and Northern Ireland. Everyone talks about Northern Ireland as though it's a road where there are a number of farms that are both in the south and the north. So there is no border. There is also, coming next April, at least to my knowledge, 2 large factories that have got to decide which part of Ireland they are going to be in, because the factories cross the borders. So therefore, moving things to be assembled from one side into Europe, or from Europe into England, is not going to work. So they've got to make that decision by April. Are you being advised of this, and are you ignorant of it? Are you also ignorant of the fact that if we choose to leave the EU, we will revert to the Dublin Agreement on immigration, which means you can't throw anybody out? Are you being advised of these facts, and are you just ignorant of it?
Thank you. Next question over here. There we are. That woman up the up there, that would be really good. In there. The third one was here. Thank you. Yes, well done. Thank you.
So given the rather grubby history of plebiscite, my name's Janet, and I'm Janet Watson, I'm from Halesworth. Given the rather grubby history of plebiscites in Germany in the 30s, do you believe in parliamentary democracy or in government by plebiscite?
Thank you. This question over here. Why did you grab mine?
I'm Julia Reynolds. In my youth, I worked for several government departments, including the Office of Fair Trading. Now, during my years there, it took several years to formulate a new rule and regulation. I was retyping it, until I knew it back to front. Now, every rule and regulation will have to be rewritten with using EU regulations now. How are we going to cope with all of that? Thank you. Julia.
Okay, so welcome from Essex at the 8th. I would suggest that Northern Ireland is being handled very carefully on both the EU 27 and the UK. Northern Ireland is seen as one of the key 3 priorities. So that is, the United Kingdom government has absolutely zero intention of there being any physical border, and we need to find a way to sort out the EU 27's concerns about elements of customs arrangements. So the concerns are on their side. So I'm fully aware
Hang on, sorry, you've had more questions. Sorry, please let them.
So that's where the issue's on. It's my discussions with the Irish ambassadors, discussions with other ministers. So you can shout at me if you like, but I'm trying to give you as honest a candid picture as I can without disclosing. You can understand the internal workings of government. So in terms of commercial decisions that businesses make, I understand this as a huge period of uncertainty. And they will have to make what they believe is the best decision for their commercial future. Within the next few months, I don't know the company to which you refer. I'm in DEFRA, but I'm not the Minister for Food and Agriculture. So I deal with other aspects of working on EU matters. In terms of regulations, yes, there's a whole... your former colleagues in the civil service, there's huge exercises being done, particularly in our department, where we have about a quarter of all regulations from the EU. And some of these are going to be quite straightforward. Instead of reporting something to the Commission, substitute that for the UK Parliament. So there are some things that are pretty straightforward, and then there's some things which are going to be a bit more complex. And that's where you get into the negotiations about, we have certain quotas with the World Trade Organization on different things. And that's where the discussions have already started with the WTO about what our approach is with the EU on how we work out what our share of the quotas that are being into the EU will then become to the UK. So there are different elements. So civil servants have already identified, I think now, every statutory instrument that might need to be changed and the regulations. And there's a huge programme underway of preparing what's called statutory instruments, so secondary legislation, of how we take that forward. In terms of the lady about plebiscites and referendums, well, Parliament voted to have the referendum, and Parliament has endorsed the referendum outcome by voting to trigger Article 50. But I think it's a little bit ridiculous to try and compare this to Nazi Germany. You know, countries like Switzerland regularly decide things by referendum. So there's different things like that that go on. So, you know, I would be a bit careful about trying to ascribe people who voted in the way that they did to unpleasant things. Now, I'm going to have to go at 12, so there's time for perhaps just very brief questions, and I'm particularly concerned to get that lady. So, you might want to get 2 or 3 little questions, which I can try and fit in.
Right over here, and then here, second one here, and the third one back. 3 women. Name, please, and where you're from.
Hi there, I'm Deborah, I'm from Wenston. My question is about, in your speech you referred to one of the benefits people perceive that we make our own laws. That's largely understood by people that we will become completely free of any foreign law-making decisions. It would be very helpful, and I wonder what your thoughts are, if it's made clearer that under the WHO rules or any other rules applied to our international relations, be they trade or the Hague Agreement, we will not be independent of any foreign jurisdiction. We will be obliged to follow the decisions of it. We will have to accept a decision-making body, and in fact that's one of the issues I know you have. What I wonder is, why cannot the government be more transparent about this? That we are not going to be free of any international restrictions.
Thank you. Quickly, here.
I'm Rebecca from Beccles, and it's just I just get tired of hearing that it was the will of the people. The people voted in total ignorance And I'd just like to ask you, Dr. Coffey, if the public were given a referendum on bringing back hanging, and as they would almost certainly overwhelmingly vote in favour, would you then go along with that?
Whoops. Where are you? Name and where
Barbara from Reading. Because the country has been in so much arguing and fighting since the vote, would it not have been better for the vote not to have taken place and the politicians themselves, who we pay to run our country, make that decision for us?
If you, dare I say, if you want to spend your time thinking about what might have been, then fine. I have to deal with what is. And as I said, Parliament voted for the referendum. The referendum happened, and Parliament voted in effect.
Parliament will vote again.
Parliament voted to accept the result of the referendum and trigger Article 50. So that's there. In terms of ignorance, I mean, as I say, I campaigned. I was out with Mike and Harry and
stick to your principles.
I wish.
Please, can we not interrupt? We've had our chance.
My principles are that I went and campaigned for something that I believed in, that I wanted to happen. But I accept that Parliament gave this decision, asked the people their view, and then Parliament has chosen to support the winning view. And it's arbitrary in terms of in or out, but people voted for all sorts of different reasons. So, as I say, I'm not going to repeat the results, rerun the referendum here, whatever. If in the future the country votes to have a party that wants a second referendum, then that party will then have the mandate to do so. One political party put that in their referendum in their manifesto this year, and the country did not vote for those people to form a government. So, we have to deal with where we are. So one of the things that I'm very, obviously I have my ministerial roles, I have specific responsibilities, but also as a constituency MP, I'm very keen that we continue to sort out the issues of things like labour that a lot of our industries are calling for. And in terms of the things about being subject to WTO rules, that's something the United Kingdom was part of before it joined the EU and will resume its full membership afterwards. And that's where Parliament had votes to kind of join those treaties and agree to that. And we will have dispute resolution mechanisms between in our future relationship with the EU. We haven't sorted out how that's going to work. European lawyers are coming forward with potential suggestions, the EFTA court being a model. So we do have to have dispute resolution mechanisms between us. But it comes back, as I say, to the principles laid out by the Prime Minister. What she took is UK Supreme Court view supreme, UK party sovereign. And at the moment that isn't the case, especially with the extent of qualified majority voting. So it is going to be a different dynamic. As I say, our European neighbours are very sad that we're leaving. This isn't actually a laughing matter. It is serious for the future of our country. As I say, I'm not only as an MP but as a minister doing my bit to try and make sure that we can make the best of it.
Can we please listen?
Thanks very much for that.
Can we please
anyway, it's 12 o'clock. Thanks very much.
Dr. Therese Coffey, MP for Suffolk. Thank you very much indeed. Let's keep going.
If you want to leave,
I hope that what Therese said makes you want this card even more. I want you to join the Suffolk EU Alliance and realise it is not over yet.
And you can just leave.
It's so not over yet. And I'll say this, it's really confusing for our children at the moment. First of all, to have their nation being done over, but also done over by a bunch of incompetent people at the moment who have no morals. And that's really confusing for them. I respect the fact that Therese knew we were doing this today and needed to come and see you. But I really feel like the Emperor without his clothes on just ran across the stage. I want you to join in and be with us, okay? Sorry, there's a bit of passion there. You've got a really great word to say, I want to know, Josh. Okay, let's make this a bit more realistic. Thank you very much, Glenn. I would like now to call to the stage. Ooh, where are we? Trevor Gerrard, bring us down to earth. Thanks, Trevor.
Good morning, my name's Trevor Gerrard, I live in Lowestoft.
Yay!
I've been asked to speak for 2 minutes, and I think I shall be able to keep to that. Now, critics of the European Union, they like to portray it as a load of foreigners telling us British what to do. Them and us. Well, my experience, ladies and gentlemen, is rather different. For over 15 years, I've been actively engaged in discussions and dialogue, mostly in Brussels, promoting the interests of public transport users and the environment. Something for which the European Union has a lot of responsibility. The European Passengers Federation, of which for many years I was chairman, it brings together 35 public transport, in other words, train and bus users, organisations in 17 EU countries, and from 3 other non-EU countries, 2 of which have also been mentioned today because they're part of the EEA, the European Economic Area. Now, we have shared experiences, and we've worked with European Union officials and members of the European Parliament, some of whom are British. You wouldn't think that, would you, to read the Daily Mail? You know, they're all foreigners. Well, they're not. A lot of them are actually British. There are people out there backing for us. Will they still be backing for us in 18 months' time out there? Or will we have all brought them back? We don't know at the moment, do we? Now, I've also been involved in organising meetings in the European Parliament on various transport matters, including most recently one on night trains. And on that occasion, the meeting was co-hosted by 2 members of the European Parliament. One was a Green MEP from Sweden, and the other was a Labour MEP from this country. We all work together, as you know, has been said by other speakers right from the start of today's meeting. We're going to have another conference in Brussels, in the European Parliament, on the 30th of January, and again, it will be co-hosted by those same 2 MEPs, one of whom is British. Now, we work together on these matters, and for me and most of my colleagues in what I might call the lobbying side of this, we're volunteers. We don't get paid, although I do have to say that there was an occasion when I received a small glass of vodka from a Polish MEP. But I didn't refuse it, although I'm not all that keen on vodka, because again it's partly what Lord Deben was telling us earlier. It's all about building up relationships, isn't it? You know, a Polish MEP offers you a glass of vodka, you accept it and you down it, and you hope that that helps your relationship with the man, or the lady, if it was a lady MEP. Now, the last main point I want to make, we in the European Passengers Federation, we've also worked on European Union projects, something which hasn't so far been mentioned much today. At the moment, for example, there's a project on electric buses called Zeus, which one of the cities which is participating in that project is London. That project is hopefully going to benefit London, which has a severe problem of air quality, amongst other things, doesn't it? So, electric buses, something where the European Union is pooling together the knowledge, the expertise from the different European countries Is that still going to happen in a year and a half's time? Are we still going to be part of that process or not? We don't know, do we? And there are other projects in EPF which we've participated in on various levels over the last 10 years. Projects on modal shift, getting people onto more environmentally friendly modes of transport, for example, on passenger information, on ticketing, on decarbonisation. And the results of this experience and the research in different countries are pooled together so that we work together and we learn from each other. And, ladies and gentlemen, British universities and other institutions contribute to that work and they benefit from it. Are we just going to walk away from all this? I sincerely hope not.
We do have a website, and for the young lady who said that she very stoically had been to the marches on her own, I have to say it's a really amazing feeling going on a march. I've never done one before, and I've taken my husband and children, and it's beautiful, and it's very satisfying, but also it says we have a voice. I met a voice about a month ago in Cambridge, the lovely Sophie. Sophie spoke with such passion for our young, for our mature young, the guys who are on second jobs, the people who are coming out of university or maybe going in to do their PhDs. I'd like to welcome Sophie Ellis, who will put you in the picture as to how she feels academically and as herself. Thank you.
Well, you've all been sat here for a long time. How are we doing? Do you want to stay in the EU? Good. All right. Well, you have been sat here for a long time and you've listened to a lot of different points of view. So hopefully in this talk you can chill out a bit, have a stretch, take a few deep breaths. And I just want it to be quite conversational, really. I'll tell you a bit about my background. I am a psychologist by trade, a forensic psychologist. Nobody really knows what one of those is, but it's fun stuff. I've worked in Her Majesty's Prison Service for 9 years in various psychological roles. I left that recently this year, and I'm now a researcher at Cambridge University in the Institute of Criminology. But I'm not so much here to talk in a professional capacity. I want to talk in a personal capacity. I grew up in Suffolk, just on the South Norfolk-North Suffolk border. Have we got anybody here from Dis? Oh, excellent! Have we got anybody here from I? No, okay, bit too small. But yeah, I grew up in this wonderful Suffolk community, but I now consider myself to be a citizen of Europe. But I didn't always. I didn't always consider myself to be so, and it was through some very lucky circumstances that I've got to this point. And I want to share with you what I learned along the way that I think every person, particularly every young person, needs to learn if we are going to see a meaningful change in this Brexit business. And by sharing that story with you, I want to achieve two things. First of all, I want to convince you all, everybody here, that you are amazing. Human beings are amazing. Whether you voted Remain, whether you voted Leave, we all have amazing potential, and we just don't recognise that sometimes, our potential to get up and do something and be counted. And the second thing I want to achieve, which is where the psychology of things comes in a little bit, is I want to talk about the universal human processes that are happening against this backdrop of Brexit, particularly the role of fear. There has been fear on both sides of this debate. If people who voted Leave, very easy to see that, isn't it? Very easy to fall prey to the fear-mongering that was going on in our press and amongst our politicians. But people that voted Remain as well, there was fear on that side because how many of us, I know that can certainly relate to this coming from Cambridge, who overwhelmingly voted Remain, how many people were a bit complacent? A bit like, be fine, it's a crazy idea, nobody's going to vote that in, it's fine, I'll just go about my day, maybe I'll post the odd thing on Facebook, but I don't need to do that much about it really, because it's crazy, it's not going to happen. And that is because that complacency is much easier. It's much easier than facing up to the fear of what might actually happen with Brexit. So there was fear on both sides of the campaign, and I think we need to really get to grips with that. One of the things I will say is I'm not an expert on Brexit at all. That is one of the things I realised. I don't know, I can't tell you a lot, or certainly not as much as some of the other wonderful speakers here, about the actual impact and about the mechanics of it all. But what I can do is say to you that everyone has the capacity to learn. If you don't know, if you don't feel politically informed or economically informed, get out there and find out. It is not that hard. We have never been better off with the internet. Lots of really accessible information is out there if you just take a bit of effort to learn it and try and get your head around it. So to get to that point where I'm opening myself up to trying to learn about Brexit and to take it on, as I said to you, I grew up in Suffolk. It was wonderful. It was an idyllic place to have a childhood. It's got lots of nice pubs. Where's the nice pub in Halesworth? There we go. But through personal circumstances, I ended up upping and offing, and I moved to Cambridge. I appreciate now that Cambridge is quite a small city, but to me at the time it was like some sort of sprawling urban metropolis, having come from Eye and Hodson and the like. And the thing that I noticed more than anything else was the overwhelming spread of people from different backgrounds. Every conceivable background, country you could think of, there was someone there in Cambridge, in restaurants, in bars, in pubs, on the street. You're surrounded by this melting pot of people. And it didn't stop there, because I was lucky enough to be able to go travelling around Europe. On the train, I'll thoroughly say do it on the train, don't just fly there, it's an amazing experience. I visited 11 countries. I went to Denmark, I went to Germany, I went to the Czech Republic, Austria. I travelled into Eastern Europe, across Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, Spain, France, Italy. I did the whole lot. And what those combined experiences taught me was the unintended but definite consequences of growing up in a rural community that is, let's face it, not as diverse as it perhaps could be. Because when you're not surrounded by different people all the time, you don't have a lot of information. Human beings make their judgment based on the information that we absorb every day. But if you don't have it, you are going to fall prey to the information that is put in front of you from the media, from the Daily Mail. I don't know how I turned out how I did, to be honest. I don't know what I'm doing here, because the Daily Mail was the only literature available in my household. Yeah, I don't quite know what happened there. And of course you're going to fall prey to your mate or your parent's friend who comes in one day and says to you that, oh, you know, bloody ponds down the road, they don't do any work, and I see them on TV all day. You're going to fall prey to that, because you don't have any other point of reference. So, whilst it's very easy to distance ourselves from that point of view and say, oh, it's racist, it's terrible, I'm not like that, blah, 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 it's a universal human process, and one that we've got to tackle a bit more sensibly than we are at the moment. And for me, that was simply going out there and meeting people from Europe and realising they're amazing, right? They are seriously amazing people, and are often very humbling and really making me think about my own values and the way that I deal with things. I'll tell you where that started. I was actually in Copenhagen on the second day of my trip around Europe, the day of Brexit. I had delayed my trip to vote, but then I was off and thought, well, at least I better get it done now, just in case. And I woke up to all these texts on my phone from friends saying, oh my God, we voted out. And I was just like, this is a joke. They're winding me up because they know I'm not there and trying to take me in. But no, it was true. And I'm not ashamed to say that I actually did cry. I actually did. I didn't expect to. Because it wasn't until that point that I realised how much I value being a citizen of Europe. But you know, the worst thing, well, not even the worst thing, the best thing, I guess, is that the Danish were so kind. They were getting hate mail pushed through their doors. What does that say? What does that say about us as a nation compared to the others that we are supposed to be so fearful of? So that was only the start of the amazing people that I met. I could tell you hundreds of stories about going across Europe. Berlin is a wonderfully bohemian, accepting, tolerant city. They're very dignified about how they present their history. They don't seek to deny it. In my view, they do a much better job of coming to terms with their past than we do with coming to terms with colonialism. You know, we've got a bit of a problem there. Eastern Europe, wonderfully amazing musical people. Totally blew away my preconceptions about Eastern European countries that I had heard and picked up as a young person from the media, didn't know any better. Austria, very hospitable people. I could go on and on. But the only real way... But clearly I'm not allowed to. These are only everyday basic social examples that I can give you. And my point is that we can put out all these facts and figures to people. We can do that. But the only real way to get people to understand what an awful thing Brexit is to get them to see and hear and feel and experience everyday lived examples. So when I came back, I thought, right, I've got to do something about this. What can I do? And I started going to marches, going to events, talking to people, writing to people, and I thought, I never really realised that this was possible. But what really got me was that when I was social about it, and I posted it on Facebook, whatever, and I said, hey guys, I'm going to this, who wants to come? Silence. Complete silence. My generation, I'm ashamed to say, not to generalise to all of them, but many of them are very politically apathetic. And that's not because people don't care. It's because people don't realise that political engagement is possible. They just don't know that it can be done. So one of the key things that I think we need to do to move forward is just to make this process as easy as possible to get involved in. Remove the barriers.
Thank you very much.
So we've got more speakers there from UEA. Oh, got a question.
I'm just sort of like wanted to say that I was really pleased that we've got Sophie, a young person here, representing the voice of the young people. I work at the University of East Anglia and I have a project called Future Leaders, and we very much try to encourage young people to take an interest in politics, but at the moment I feel there is a lack of real positive role models I could use in my lectures. And what I would like to say is that the voice of young people is now documented. There is a new document out which is called My Life, My Say, and it's published this month, and it is a cross-party initiative where they collected the views of young people in Britain. So it's called My Life, My Say, and the other one is Demos has published a report, and it's called Next Generation UK. If you would be so kind to spread that with the young people you know, and say there are practical tips, there are also, it is what young people want from the Brexit deal, and it's collectively, they collected the views all over the UK. And thank you very much, Sophie, for presenting the voice of young people, and that you are going on your marches, and keep going. Thank you.
Are there any more young people that want to put a question?
You don't have to be young.
You don't have to be, but you would just get preference, right? But anyone has a question? That gentleman at the back.
My name is Mike Burr from Woodbridge.
Hang on, Mike, let me get you the mic. Sorry, whoops. There we go.
I'm Mike Burr from Woodbridge. We've had some advice here about how to engage young people. Firstly, could you say how you think we ought to try and engage young people? And secondly, much more important, could somebody write a half paragraph, a few lines, summarising what we should all do, one practical step we can do to try and engage young people?
Thank you. And then there was another 1,000 here.
Hi there, Rob Davidson from London. So you've been put up as the representative of the young people and you're being asked to describe how we reach out to young people. But the rhetoric here today has been very, very... If there was a Brexiteer in the audience, they would have left by now. And I'm just wondering if you, as a psychologist, the experience of reaching out to people and helping them come together or whatever, if you could tell us also how to just reach across the divide to Brexiteers of all ages and how to engage them, because that's what we need to do.
Thank you.
So regarding the question of how to engage young people, I can only speak from my experience, and certainly for me, somebody telling me to go out there and do these things, you're onto a no-winner quite quickly. It doesn't... To get someone to do something, I hate to say it, but we are all to an extent self-interested. All right? We don't all have that social conscience. I think when you are well settled in your life, when you are financially secure, when you are secure in your relationships, when you have time, then your social conscience comes to the fore, and you may do these things out of a matter of duty. But when you're a young person and you're starting out, you've got 1,000 concerns, okay? You're perhaps not as mature as you could be. You've got to negotiate social things. You've got to get yourself a job amongst everyone telling you that there's no jobs. You've got to prove yourself increasingly through education and university. You haven't got time and space in your head to get involved in these things. It's much easier to just leave it to some other people to do it. So to get young people engaged, you need to give them a personal reason of something they will get out of it. And it needs to be more immediate than in 20 years' time your future will be better, because human beings, we're wired to respond to immediate threat. We're not very good at planning for the future. Our alarm system doesn't go off.
So what are the self-interested points that young people would...
For me, it is certainly with going on the marches, they are amazing social experiences. Everyone's there, everyone believes in the same thing, everyone's having a good time. It's just fun, in and of itself. And maybe that you need a bit more than that because of it being such a big issue. But for a start, it's just pitching it as a fun, interesting, stimulating thing to get out of bed and do. I think as well it's to do with confidence. I think there is very much a confidence crisis at times within young people. It's about saying, look, come along and find out that you can get involved in these things. It's not as hard as it might seem. And then, I guess the other thing would be, from my personal experience, is don't jump the gun and try and immediately get people engaged in this political stuff. Just get them out there and exposed to something. The Erasmus programme, people heard of that?
Yes.
Yeah. What a brilliant idea. We're not going to be able to fund it without the EU, but we can do a similar thing where we get young people from here to something. I'm very lucky to live in Cambridge. There's public lectures and things on practically every night. You can just go and get exposed to thinking. And I think you need to start small with little initiatives like that. Hey guys, we've got a minibus, jump on it, come and listen to this stuff and we'll go for pizza afterwards. It's small steps.
So, I think, does that answer your question?
Well,
Yeah.
it doesn't give me anything to do, but it certainly points out where I usually go wrong.
To Mark, so this is Mark, he's on our committee, and I would like him just to have 2 minutes to talk about the young people. So this is Mark, who's representing our young people.
Hello everybody, my name is Mark Gibbons. I've been a member of the EU Suffolk Alliance now for over a year and regularly attend our meetings in Woodbridge on a Tuesday evening. Over a number of the meetings we have talked about making the EU Suffolk Alliance relevant to young people. We've been remarkably successful at increasing our membership to well over 350, but if we look around the room today, we have been very relevant if you're 40 and over. We've been less relevant if you are under 40. and really picking up the challenge that Sophie has just given us, we want to make the EU Suffolk Alliance relevant to the young people of Suffolk and roundabout. So what we're thinking we want to do is we want to set up a committee member who is responsible for creating a youth section for the EU Suffolk Alliance. What we want to do is have somebody that can coordinate and galvanise young people so they can have fun, so they can go on marches as a group of young people, getting out of bed and being involved with their peer group, making it feel unthreatening, enjoyable and rewarding. So there are not many people of Sophie's age in the room, but happily, with the human condition, we all have children, we all have grandchildren. Can I please ask all of you to explain that the EU Suffolk Alliance wishes to create this youth section? We want to start running events which are relevant to young people. We want to start putting content which is relevant to young people on the website. We actually want to make this an organisation that serves all of the pro-European movement, not just for those of us who are over 40. I'm standing up at the moment to initiate this, but we really want that person on the committee to be a younger member of society. So if you can reach out to Julia or myself, or members of your family that would A, be interested in taking on that role, but in general being involved and following in the vanguard that Sophie has so ably created and explained to us today. Thanks a lot.
Sophie would like to answer just one question that Rob asked of her, and can I then prepare Rob to make a speech in a minute?
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to address the question asked by Rob down here about reaching out to Brexiteers and Leavers, because I think in many ways that's the most pertinent question that's been asked today. I mean, don't get me wrong, you're all great, but this is to an extent preaching to the converted, isn't it? We all want out. So we need to think about how do we actually meaningfully influence things so that the tide shifts. And answering Rob's question from a psychological point of view, I've got to say, with all due respect, don't speak to people like Therese Coffey like that, because what happened was everybody heckled her, not everybody, but you know, there was a few very well-made points, I must say, but did you see her reaction? It was very much a, well, I'm just making it a fuss now, aren't you? Like, if you directly challenge people in that way, they're just going to dig their heels in, even if it is in such a simplified way as saying, well, we're voting now, that's it, tough luck. By heckling, it invites that response. It invites the Brexiteers, the Leavers, to defend their point of view, you know, because they don't want to be seen to be changing their minds. That the number one thing that gets people to listen to you on any subject is if you make them feel validated. Okay? If you let them know, I've heard you, I've understood what you're saying. Maybe I don't agree with it, but I'm able to say back to you, yeah, do you know what, you've said X, Y, and Z, and I can understand why you feel that way and why that's a problem for you. It's like a golden key to unlocking meaningful dialogue for people to listen to you. So even if it makes you grind your teeth a bit, if you want to engage people in a way where you want to change their minds, then you need to say, tell me your concerns. Tell me why you voted Leave. And when they tell you their reasons, whether you think they're ridiculous or not, validate them and then have the conversation. Okay? Because that, in my view, is the most meaningful way to get people with a different point of view to you to listen.
I'm just going to say the thank yous now. Then we're going to have Rob run by Anne and some questions, and I'm sure then you're all going to run home for Saturday lunch. Can I thank everybody here for being here, for the committee of the Suffolk EU Alliance. I really hope that you join us. I thank the Council for looking after us, and there will be an event probably in February, March next year, because we have to keep going. Before Easter is key, okay? And it may be that we have to do something that's much more, as Sophie says, as an outreach. We've got to go do something completely different. I'm now going to give you Dr. Rob Davidson, who's going to put you in the picture as to what's happening with science in the EU. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
So, I think that was a good point made by Sophie. We do have to try and meet people sort of halfway. Everyone voted for a different reason, but everyone felt they were voting for the right reasons. There was no one vindictively saying, oh, this will teach them, I'll take away their futures, ha 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 ha. It wasn't the child catcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang voting against remaining in the EU. It is very difficult though. Therese Coffey stood here and lied to us, misrepresented what democracy means, what it has always meant in Britain. She stood here and she lied, or didn't understand the World Trade Organization. She said that we were in it before the EU, we'll be able to go back to being in it after we leave the EU. But I double checked this because I thought that that's not right. The WTO was set up in 1994. Now, we joined the European Community in 1973. And even if you took it as the Maastricht Treaty was the real coming together or whatever, that was 1992. And so in 1994, when the WTO was set up, we joined as a member of the EU. Now, either she doesn't know that, in which case she's not up to the job at hand because she's ill-informed, or she does know that, but she was willfully lying to you. Now, I don't know which one of those it is. It's hard to judge someone's motivations just from looking on from the outside. But I would suggest that she's not doing a very good job for you. And so you might want to consider that in the next election. She also misrepresented the situation with Switzerland on at least 2 occasions, but I'm going to now start my timer and get back to my talk. So, my name is Dr. Rob Davidson. I'm a scientist. I'm a data scientist, which means that I can work on lots of different things because I work with the data regardless of where it comes from. And so my background, I've worked in environmental research, I've worked in psychological research, I've worked on big data science with social media. But my training, as with many people today in British science and academia, was in health. I did a PhD at the Royal Marsden Hospital, studying cancer in the MRI department, analysing the data there. It's a great institution, and it's an example of where British science and industry is at the moment. It's a public hospital that receives funding from all sorts of different sources, from the EU, from international funds, from charities, from government. And it brings people together from all over the world to treat people from all over the world. It's a really great institution. And this is when I set up Scientists for the EU with some colleagues, and very quickly we realised that we needed to set up something that represented all the clinicians and the health scientists and the researchers and the people, the bioscientists, the biologists, who all had an interest in health. And no one else was doing it, so we set up first Scientists for the EU, but then Healthier in the EU. And so I've been running these 2 campaigns initially. I was a scientist doing campaigning in my spare time. Now I'm a campaigner that does science in my spare time. So it's a great pleasure to be here today and speak to you. I'm going to try and speak to you about both science and health, because both of these things are really important and they are super interlinked. Since 1980, cancer survival has doubled. That's an amazing feat, and we should be really proud of that as a nation and as a global community. One of the reasons, there's many reasons for that, one of the reasons is that medical science has new drugs since the 80s. It has MRI, it has CAT scans, 3D ultrasound, genetic screening, and even the new methods of gene therapy, where we try and program your cells in a new way. Health is science, and science is often about health. It's a complex situation. We can't just go back to the 1970s, we can't go back to matrons running the wards, and all these mythological beliefs in some sort of carry-on nursing system where it all worked wonderfully, there were no waiting lists. Life has changed and moved on. You cannot roll the clock back. And so we have to consider health and science as this interrelated thing. Now, I'm going to sort of tack a little bit. I'm going to try and start with an analogy. Imagine the Scottish independence referendum. Don't ask me which one I voted. I wasn't allowed to. I wasn't in the country at the time. But the SNP produced a 600-page document about what independence would look like as far as they could foresee. And then the people voted. Now, a lot of those predictions were based on the price of oil. After the referendum, the price of oil tanked. There were loads of geopolitical reasons for this. People were trying to punish Russia, they were trying to get Saudi Arabia to produce more oil than they would normally do, to help do that. There was loads of reasons, but nonetheless, the price of oil fell. Now imagine the Scots had voted for independence and oil prices had dramatically fallen. And imagine Westminster had said, we've got to take your first answer. No more democracy allowed. The will of the Scottish people has spoken. You're not allowed to change course. That's democracy. Can you imagine that? That would have seemed like the most punishing, vindictive, anti-democratic thing in the world. If the Scottish people had said, well, we voted for with one view of the future, and that's now no longer possible. We wish to change course. If Westminster said, no, you can't do that, democracy ended on that day, that's democracy, the Scots would be up in arms. But most Brits would join them and say that's not right. Westminster should allow them to think again. The goalposts have shifted. There's new facts. Let them have a new vote. But we're being told that right now. We're being told that we can't have any more democracy. The democracy stopped. As the gentleman said over there, democracy died on the 23rd of June, 2016. No more democracy. None. It's the will of the people. And as someone said, there's striking parallels with 1920s Italy and 1930s Germany. It's very, very concerning. So, my expertise is science. Let's tell you a bit about what's happening with science. Now, before the referendum actually took place, the debate about science and what it would look like after Brexit was a bit nuanced. It was quite hard to work out. There were so many aspects to it. Now, 90% of academics, scientists and industry researchers were pro-Remain, but in theory, lots of Brexit options would allow science to continue in a similar way. We might have had to pay a little bit more, it might have been a bit less efficient, but we could maybe have taken part, joined in, still been part of the community. And so it was quite difficult at times to really have a strong, clear choice there. But the Brexit we're getting does not leave any of that open. We now know the Brexit we're getting precludes us from participation in EU science. Theresa May said in Florence that she'd be willing to pay to access the EU's cultural programmes, and that included science. But money's not the issue. The issue is the two red lines of the Brexit government. So that's the issues are, rather. Sorry, my grammar's terrible. So the first red line of the Brexit government is restriction of immigration. Now, Therese Coffey said that Switzerland had a lot of stuff to show us about it. It certainly does. It certainly does. In 2014, Switzerland had its own narrow referendum on the subject of restricting immigration for Croatians that were coming in. It wasn't restricting it across the board the way that we're supposedly doing, that's our red line. It was just about Croatians who were a bit concerned, they wanted to hold off on what they thought would be an influx coming in. And the EU said, well, you're not in the EU, and it's all done by bilateral agreements. But still, if you want to access the EU science programmes, you have to accept free movement as part of the package. They said, well, yeah, referendum can't go against that. And you said, well, it's fine, it's fine. And so Switzerland was downgraded, massively downgraded. And it had to try and compensate for that. It duplicated bureaucracies, it spent a load more money, it begged and pleaded, it was allowed in for a little while, but eventually they were given an ultimatum at Christmas last year: either accept the movement or be a third country completely downgraded partner. Switzerland, because very much like the UK, they rely on their knowledge economy, they rely on their science and universities, their biosciences, pharmaceutical industry, they rely on that for so much of their economy and their infrastructure. They overturned their own narrow referendum to restrict immigration. Now, I would love to think this was the model that all these Brexiteers were pointing to. But they just seem to be like blinkered on this. They don't seem to think. And so the Brexiteers would say, well, the Brexit leaders would say, oh, well, we'll have a new unique deal. It won't be like Switzerland at all. It was a minute ago, but it's not going to be anymore. You've mentioned a problem with it. We're going to have the bigliest deal. It's going to be the bestest deal, and we're going to be the greatest. They need us more than we need them, blah, blah, blah. But that's not how politics works. The EU can't say, well, we just wrap them around the knuckles for doing this, and now it's okay for you to do it. That would destroy the relationship with Switzerland, and it would disrupt the harmony within the EU, which is something that they're more concerned about, the EU 27, than they are the relationship with us. So that's one reason why we know that the future is not bright for science, education, universities, our knowledge economy that we're meant to try to build. But there's another, even more pressing problem, the other red line of Brexit. And that is this desire, this constantly restated desire to remove ourselves from the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. Something that not one of us cared about before the referendum, something that we're all apparently mad keen for now. There is a checkbox on any application form to take part in EU science programmes. And it asks you a question, it says, do you, as the primary investigator of this scientific endeavour, do you foresee that your national government would allow you to be under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice? And at this point in time, we would have to say no. And then from there, you put the application in the bin. So even if Theresa May is willing to pay money to take part in EU science, we're not going to be able to fill out the forms to actually take part in EU science. Completely precludes us from it. The government has no answers for this. It hasn't even thought about it as far as we know. They don't respond to our calls. But yeah, so science, academia is ruined. We have benefited massively from participation in EU science. The UK has a great history in science on its own, but science has changed. Like I said, we've developed. It's moved towards health, away from physics and chemistry. It's moved towards health, biology. It's massively more complex. We have MRI scans, we have genetic screening, we have all these sorts of things. Requires massive specialisation of labour, movement of skilled workers, collaboration networks, and the EU has been perfect for this. The EU puts loads of money into just building collaborations and encouraging people to move and work together and facilitating that. And the UK is at the top of the science tree, largely because we're standing on the large global platform that is the EU. Let's see. The people that were interested in science during the referendum debate voted for a pro-science, pro-university, pro-knowledge economy, Brexit or Remain. They all voted for the same things. Everyone thought we would have a positive future for science and for education and for universities. But instead, the Brexit leaders have moved the goalposts. Brexit has shifted. The Brexit we're getting is not the Brexit that anyone voted for. Instead of a pro-science, pro-universities, pro-education, pro-knowledge economy Brexit, we're getting cuts and job losses announced so far at Durham, Manchester, Aberystwyth, Ewart, and 3 or 4 others I can't remember right now. But our universities are suffering. They're losing international students, which have been propping them up for a long time. They're facing guaranteed loss of funding. They're facing guaranteed loss of talent, loss of infrastructure. And so they're making job cuts now. Hundreds of millions of pounds are being cut from universities up and down in the country because they know the future is not right for them. That is the Brexit we're getting. It's not the Brexit anyone voted for. But we're not allowed to change our minds. Now, on the subject of health, other than the fact that health is a science, and if our universities and university hospitals are damaged, then our health system is damaged. I want to say, forget about the big red bus. People voted for a stronger, better funded, better resourced NHS, regardless of which way they voted. The Brexit we're getting is not fulfilling that will of the people. The day before the Brexit vote, 60% of people thought that Brexit would be good for the NHS. And this is because the Leave campaign lied, cheated, stole, whatever, they misrepresented the situation, but they won that argument. People believed that it was going to be better. In terms of money, the day after the Brexit vote, Nigel Farage appeared on TV and said, well, I never promised that. I would never have promised that. That was a silly promise to make. And almost the day after Brexit, in the polls, you can see that 60% NHS is going to be saved by Brexit. It became 50-50, we're not really sure what's going on. We don't know what's going on. The will of the people on that issue has become less clear. Theresa May said, pretty much straight away, as soon as she got into power, there's no money for the NHS for Brexit. Obviously, she never promised that either. She was on the other side. So, In his first Chancellor's statement in November last year, Philip Hammond pointed to a Brexit black hole in the budget and used Brexit to excuse several more years of austerity. In his spring budget, despite having just gone through the worst winter crisis the NHS has ever seen, Hammond still gave not a penny to the NHS. So, the Brexit we're getting is not what anyone voted for. You have to ask yourself, is the NHS in a fit state to handle a bad Brexit? For 7 years, patient demand has risen by 4% each year. Funding has risen by 0.2%. The NHS cannot afford a bad Brexit. That means we cannot afford a bad Brexit. But Brexit leaders have moved the goalposts. We're not getting the Brexit we voted for, and we're not allowed to demand better. I won't try and quicken up, just give me two minutes please, if that's right. So on the issue of staffing, people voted to keep nurses. They said, oh well, the good immigrants can stay. The bad immigrants, they're the ones who want to leave, whoever they are, we're not really sure. But that's not how migration works. There are lots of good countries to choose from, and people are very mobile these days. You have to encourage people to come to your country. They're not desperate to come to the UK, they just think it was quite a welcoming place to come to. It had some opportunities. But there's opportunities in Spain, Germany, France, Holland, Belgium. These are great places to work, especially in their healthcare systems. So we've got to encourage people to come. But since the vote, we've seen a drop in applications of over 90% from nurses alone coming in to the UK. And we've seen a doubling of the number of nurses leaving, going back to the EU. The Brexit we're getting doesn't deliver the reassured, safe, still here nurses that people thought they were going to vote for. And you have to ask yourself, is the NHS in a fit state to handle a bad Brexit? Well, over 90% of trusts in England have been rated as dangerously understaffed in the last couple of years. Patients' lives are literally at risk already from understaffing. Unfilled nurse vacancies are roughly 40,000, and Brexit is definitely pushing that up already. But it's not just nurses and doctors, they're the favourite of the people. We have a shortage of radiologists, statisticians, clinical physicists, epidemiologists, and we're losing all the researchers and things that underpin a lot of that work. And we're facing a retirement bomb. It's not just the population that's getting older, but doctors, nurses, radiologists, they're all getting older. A third of GPs plan to retire in 5 years' time. We can't train more GPs in that time, even if you have the attitude that we should just grow our own. The NHS staffing crisis cannot afford a bad Brexit. But Brexit leaders have shifted the goalposts. We're not getting the Brexit that anyone voted for, and we're not allowed to demand better. I will then try and cut to the round-up end instead of all the rest of the stuff. So I said at the start of that health rant, forget about the big red bus. And when I was asking Sophie about how do we reach out to Brexiteers, I've been trying to do that for a long time. We have to accept that everyone voted for the right reasons. We all wanted good things. So we all need to get over it to some extent. We have to accept the referendum result, even though it was clearly horrific nonsense and narrow and whatever. But everyone voted. We can't just say we were right, we were wrong, get over it, come over to our side. We need to acknowledge that Brexiteers had good intentions when they voted the way they did. We need to then get back on to being democratic. We need to defend democracy. We're losing democracy right now. Democracy did die on the 23rd of June 2016. We need to be more democratic. We need to hold our politicians to account if they're not giving us the Brexit that we voted for, if they're shifting the Brexit goalposts. The Brexit we're getting is not what we voted for. Our politicians have gone astray. It is democratic to demand transparency. It is democratic to hold them to account. It is democratic to tell them they're wrong. It is democratic to demand a new direction. You cannot damage democracy by adding democracy. The Brexiteers are shifting the goalposts, and we need to demand better. We need to add democracy to Brexit, not just let David Davis and a few extremists tell us what we voted for. With new facts, we deserve a new vote.
data and information. Facts that I was trying to catch up with while you were speaking, but kept evading me.
We also have fact sheets on our website. We can share them with you. You've got some flyers outside, I think.
Can we
have the whole speech, please? Yes,
the whole
absolutely.
speech would be really great. Now, I see 3 hands only from here. See here. So the gentleman right at the back, yes, the one in front of him, and the lady, the woman there, please. 3, and then we'll go again. Right.
Hello, my name's Tim from Dis. You've been strong, you put a very strong point over that we're not getting the reduction we voted for. Now, I'd be interested to know what you're doing to overcome some of the problems that are being caused by the media, who have got particularly the Murdoch media and the Vladimir media, who have got an immense and powerful investment in stopping people understanding what the issues are and why the mistake has been made and for whom we are Brexiting. And are you able in your work to counteract that through positive media campaigning?
Thank you for your question. Second one here.
Sorry, Mike, that's absolutely fantastic speech, but I do just want to correct one fact, since we're into correcting facts, and that's on Switzerland. They didn't reverse the referendum, as far as I know. They passed a law to make it obligatory to advertise your job to local citizens, but you didn't have to delay your recruitment. And that was their answer to the referendum. Theresa May has formed in doing that kind of thing, I have to say. I thought, absolutely fantastic.
I'm Joanna from Halesworth. I think the question's probably the same as the gentleman's up there. How are you able to put these points across with the facts and figures to in other situations where you're not talking to the converted? Thank you.
Right.
Yes, so the Swiss did have a workaround. It wasn't a full reversal, but it was a big change in direction. I'll still take that as well. So the other questions are about media bias, the tabloids, Daily Mail, these horrific organisations that lie to people for their own agenda, and how to get facts across, facts and figures and so on. So we feel like we did quite well in getting positive news stories out there, letters written in the Times and articles written in the Guardian and the Independent and so on, and now we've been in the New European and this sort of thing. Clearly not well enough. We lost the referendum, and it's difficult. It's difficult to combat it. What has become, we're learning more and more about how this has happened. It wasn't just the newspapers, and it wasn't just the newspapers that were lying to people. You had millions and millions and millions of pounds being spent by the Leave campaign from offshore sources, shall we say, and they spent way more money on it than the Rate campaign, and they targeted social media, which is a really powerful way, and they did what Sophie was saying, they validated everyone's concerns. So they didn't talk about facts and figures much. Their major media campaign would be something like, are you concerned about immigration? Join us today. So they validated the concern without addressing any part of it. And it seems like we're going to have to slightly dumb down our arguments and go a bit like that. We have to engage with people on an emotional level, and this is something we need to ramp up. As scientists, we try to put forward the facts and figures in nice graphics and simple ways, clear facts and figures and numbers. And it turns out people aren't really that gripped by the concept of GDP or national statistics. And I used to work at the Office for National Statistics, and that makes me cry a little bit inside. Well, I don't expect everyone to go and say words with me there. So we need to start addressing people, validating what their concerns are, not necessarily mollycoddling them or saying, yes, you're right to fear the polls. But we do have to start changing the way that we do things. We need to have facts underpinning what we say, so that we can defend things in long-form articles and debates. But we do need to start getting to grips with just talking and listening to people and presenting them with something they can immediately respect and feel like it's coming from a similar place to what they're saying. And so there's a large bit of psychology in there. This is something that Leave.eu invested a lot of money in with Cambridge Analytica, who famously had a press release at the start of the campaign saying, we're definitely going to help these guys out, we've got all this stuff we're going to do for them, and then just afterwards they went, oh well, I mean, they didn't declare any spending on that, so clearly we didn't help them. And so, but yeah, so they spent a lot of money on that, and we're now investing in that sort of thing as well. Not nefarious, underhand methods, like some of what Cambridge Analytica has done, but in terms of trying to understand the wider audience, not just speaking to our core support, trying to reach out, understand the wider audience, and then trying to find a message that appeals to them. So the NHS is a very strong one. Everyone identifies with the crisis in the NHS. It turns out funding is not such a big issue for everyone, because I guess the Daily Mail has convinced everyone that there's too many fat cats in the NHS, so much waste in the NHS, it's just a black hole. None of this is true, but it seems to be the winning narrative at the moment. So, but staffing is the big one that everyone can identify with. So the way we're pushing ahead with is to say, are you concerned about the staffing in the NHS? Here's 5 reasons why that's a problem. And then not starting with Brexit, but starting with the fact that we've had a squeeze on funding for a long time. We've taken away bursaries in recent, local politics. And so we're not having new people come through in such a big way. We have a retirement bomb that's happening. And there's lots of reasons why this is all coming to a head, and Brexit exacerbates all that. So, yeah,
Thank you very much. Can I just say that, what we are aware of is that the opposite side uses project fear. And can I say also that there's a lack of confidence in technocrats, in facts and figures. People have lost their confidence because let's admit that the Remain campaign was based on issuing all kinds of numbers designed to make people fearful, and it had the opposite effect. So there's a way in which we have to make a very positive case and not just the negative. So then I want to have 3 more, and then I think we're wrapping up. Is that right? Okay, so the woman over there next to Sue, yes, and then this one here, and that person here. And I'll give you mine. Whoops, clear up. Yes,
Barbara Langley, Halesworth. Just to follow up the point about the media and how to put the point across. I just looked briefly at 2 newspapers today. The Guardian headline article, the headline, which I think is quite a simple, emotive sort of thing, cost of Brexit, £930 a year on shopping bills. Now, the East Anglian Daily Times, always, as well as local news, has a section reflecting national and world news, and usually that reflects the headlines in the major newspapers. I might have missed something, but I had a quick look through today and could not see that point which the Guardian headlines reflected in the East Anglian Daily Times. And I have a suspicion that the editor of the East Anglian Daily Times somehow filters out some of the letters which are about anti-Brexit in favour of the ones that are pro-Brexit. I don't know whether anybody has any more knowledge on this, but I feel as though in East Anglia, possibly our local newspapers are slightly biased in favour of Brexit.
DDP's the same.
Hang on, just a moment.
That's why they're not here today. They were invited, four journalists have been invited. We've done press release. We have nothing.
You can find yourself persuasive.
Thank you for blind. You said about the NHS staffing crisis. You can't afford about Brexit. And you can't afford about Brexit. Do you think surely that it can't actually afford staying party political, and that one way of stabilising both funding and staffing, in fact, is for it to become apolitical with long-term strategy rather than passing around against financial?
Thank you. There was a third question. Yes, can you say your...
Hello, I'm Peter Fuller, I'm from Brandeston. I work in public relations and I spend my life trying to change people's opinions. You're perfectly right in saying that Leave appealed to people's emotions. That's, I'm afraid, what we have to do. Looking around here, we're all nice, middle-class, rational people. People didn't vote in Brexit, certainly not for Brexit, on rational grounds. You're a scientist, you have to act rationally. Sadly, the referendum wasn't lost on rational grounds, it was lost on emotional grounds. Those are what we have to address. There are some emotions here regarding the media. I work with all the media, local, national, all of those people. The only question that I've known the East Anglian Daily Times to be biased about was hunting, because the family who owned the company were staunch supporters. And other than that, they don't want to piss off their readers, whoever they are. The question of the headline in The Guardian, I think it said exclusive, which is why the Guardian labelled it, nobody else did. But we do have to address the emotional appeal and not rational. And you're right, I would have to ask, what other steps do you see that we can use just appealing to people's gut instincts?
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay, so clearly there's a lot of concern about the media here and how they do things. Although I did say that the Daily Mail is a nefarious rag, I didn't put it in that terms, but that's what I was getting at. And they have an agenda. They do have their utmost desire is to retain their position of authority with their audience, because it's their audience that allows them to have a position of power over anyone else. And so the papers like the East Anglia Times, or whatever it was that you said, sorry, on the EUV or whatever you mentioned there. Sorry, I don't know your yeah, I don't know what newspapers are. But anyway, if they don't reflect your concerns as much, it's because you're in a minority here. And if the Daily Mail and the Sun and the Times and the Telegraph were massively pro-Brexit, the Times said it was pro-Remain, but then if you look at the content, it wasn't on average. Then it's because their audience reflects that. So the only way we're really going to get them to change is if we manage to convince people, it's a cart and horse thing, or chicken and egg thing or whatever. They have an ability to stabilise and normalise these negative opinions, and so that makes it problematic for changing opinions. But if we manage to change opinions, then they will change their stance as well. And even the Daily Mail would do that if enough of their supporter base were to come over and they didn't feel so confident anymore. So there is scope for this. You just have to reach out in other ways. You can do it at meetings like this. You can do it through social media. You can do it, having other meetings, various things, and just talking to as many friends and family members, because they're probably more likely to trust you than a politician, and then sort of trying to draw people into your movement. We do have the benefit that the Brexit was fought on emotions from the other side and facts on our side. Now we're having the Brexit reality, now we're having the debate that we should have had. As it's long, drawn out, it's not long enough, we're running out of time, but it's long and drawn out, and the Brexit we're getting looks absolutely disastrous to most people now. Some people still think that we should carry on regardless, but the faith has been shaken. And this is the problem when you build your campaign on emotion only. It's like building your house in the sand. It does have trouble. It's like a house of cards. It doesn't take a lot to knock it down. And so this is what we're hoping, is that we can keep coming in with Brexit reality, and it will chip away, opinions will shift. So the lady here said the problem with the NHS is that it's too political and it should become apolitical, I think. Is that the sort of gist, was it?
Yeah, it's just that one's lived through absolutely loads of reorganisations, all of which cost money. It just takes money away directly from patient care and research.
It does, yes. And so it is. I mean, the NHS is inherently political. Healthcare is inherently political, and the personal is political. And so it's difficult to see what other alternative there is. In many ways, the NHS isn't political enough. Like, doctors and nurses don't speak out enough because they're told not to. You have the unions represent them, and they're horrendously political in their own way. But individual doctors and nurses aren't allowed to whistleblow, they aren't allowed to speak up. And so I think we could combat the over-politicisation from the top down with more politicisation from the grassroots up to some extent, by allowing a voice to doctors and nurses and the other staff that are in there without fear of recrimination. And we could perhaps help to combat the costly destructive reorganisations that we've seen so often. But if we look at international comparisons, the NHS generally, often, comes out on top. And so when you compare it to other situations that are the half-and-half model of private and public, or when you compare it to the US, which is a horrendously wasteful system that not everyone gets access to, it is kind of hard to see what a better system would be that didn't involve some sort of political agenda from the top. So it is difficult. And then there was a third one, which was how to appeal to something. It was about the emotions and things. I think that comes into this. Facts will win out over the long term. It's just if we've got enough time for that. But you have to sell the facts in an emotional way, and that's the problem we've been having. But again, hopefully that is something that, as the problems of Brexit mount up, it will become more emotional for people, and it will become more personal. Local effects will be seen. People's lives will be affected. That's not something to wish for. But it becomes more personal.
Was there one, two, and there? Here, right?
You're talking about. I'm sorry.
No, your turn. Back on.
Hello, I'm Liz Runnell. And we're talking about green facts emerging, and I just really was just going to mention the situation with the 58 Brexit impact studies. David Davis is obviously trying to store it and edit it, and we may not know the true facts. I mean, if they were all released as they're written, it might be that even the Daily Mail would agree. I mean, that's
And then one more question up there. Yes.
This is a very specific question to do with science and health and recruitment. But there has been some talk that, we don't want all foreigners coming to do jobs. If Europeans can't come, we can get them from somewhere else, like China and America. And I'm sure you have a view about that kind of statement and would like to hear it.
I could talk about that for hours. So the Brexit impact studies. So before all this was coming out, I put in a freedom of information request to the Department of Exiting the EU, saying, can you just tell me what impact studies you've done, just the names of them? I realise it was sensitive. I just want the names, what we would call the metadata, like which department was doing it, what the vague title or area was, maybe the date you expected to be completed. And I said, there shouldn't be any sensitive things about this. I'm not asking for any of the content. I just want to know which departments, which areas, when it's going to be ready. And they came back and said, oh, no, that's far too sensitive, we can't do that. If people knew what we were studying, they would know what we are studying. And that made me bad. If we missed anything out, then they would be able to say that we're not ready. And I thought, well, that would be they were right. And so it's really pleasing to me that Molly Cato, MEP, Green Party, has been pushing this. That it's become a cross-party issue now, that Labour have picked it up. And so I'm really pleased to see that it's coming out. But there is this concern now. The secrecy of Brexit has been a massive travesty in our British democracy. You're allowed to vote for it, but you're not allowed to know what it looks like. And the notion of this poker game that we're playing, and you're not allowed to show your hands to anyone because then you might lose, and you go, well, but that's if you're trying to bluff everyone, and you shouldn't be trying to bluff the British public, but that is what we're trying to do. So here's the thing, so they're going to redact a shed load of the stuff in the impact assessments. I'm okay with that, because I reckon we can use that
I reckon if we say, right, okay, here's the 56, 58, here's all the areas they're in, and here's what percentage of it was redacted. Let's look at medical services, which is the NHS essentially. Oh, that was like 80% redacted. Brilliant. And then let the imaginations run wild, compared to the farming one that was only 20% redacted, or compared to the fishing one that was only 40%. The more they hide, the more we can say, look, they're hiding it because they know that the NHS is... There was another one about, getting people from other places. Yeah, so this is hilarious to me. A lot of the voters, the vox pops on the street after the referendum, we said to people, well, you come from an area that has hardly any EU migration. They went, yeah, but I've been to Bradford and I've been to Leeds and I've seen them. I've seen them. We say, well, what do you mean you've seen them? They go, well, you can see foreigners everywhere. I've been to London, it's full of foreigners, you can see them. It's like, those are the brown people, wouldn't they? And it's like, those aren't from the EU, it's not going to change. In fact, apparently the result is we're going to get more of those, And so, Theresa May went to India to try and get more stuff out of Modi and to see if we could have a trade deal and just general friendship, colonialism, yeah. And the two things, he said, we'd love to trade with the UK, that's great. But we need a couple of things. We need visas for our students so they can come and study in universities. And Theresa May went, no, can't do that. Because she hates the idea of foreign people coming to universities because it props up universities, and she seems to not like that either. Quality universities for quality people, not lots of universities for everyone. But that's like veering into my problems with Theresa May. I'm trying to wrap it down. And then the other one they said was, all right, well, that was kind of a sticker on that one. We were really keen on it because when they go to universities, they come back to work with us and they have more skills and they really help to boost our local infrastructure. They said, well, okay, look, we also have a whole bunch of IT professionals here at all levels of IT. It's not just call centre work; it's the whole shebang. We've been kind of specialising in it because you don't need many resources. You just need a laptop and lots of motivation to study. And so we're really good at it. And we know that your British industries are crying out for skilled IT workers, and we've got the skills. So we'd love to have more visas to send to your country to help your industries out, because your industries are crying out for it, but we can't actually give you people, And she said, no, can't do that. They'll never take it. We can't have more foreign people, especially the ones that look really foreign. Don't want them. And it's the same with China, we don't want Chinese people coming here, we don't want Indians coming here, we don't want West Indians coming here. It's just shifting the focus around, And the other thing is that geography matters. So although India was really keen to send people to us, and although there's a lot of Chinese people, full stop, but there's a lot of Chinese people who are keen to come to the UK for a while. But geography really matters. People don't want to uproot from their entire social support network, their family, their friends, maybe their children, maybe their grandparents are getting older, and to move across the other end of the world where they can't afford to fly back and forth to see their family and so on. So we get most of our scientists come from, despite the fact that China is the world's biggest nation, despite the fact that the US and the UK have such a great relationship over many, many years, despite the fact that we have good relationships with Australia and so on, but our biggest donators of scientists and technicians all come from the EU. And that's because they can just jump on a plane and fly back, see their friends and family, and then they can come back to work. And we're not going to replace that. Instead, we're just going to make that, even if it's 5% harder, that's maybe 5% less people.
Okay, one last question. Here we are.
I've never felt so popular.
I've got quite a loud voice anyway. Rob Hamilton, Halesworth. I've enjoyed the presentations, but I have a slightly uncomfortable feeling we've skirted around the main issue. Since we're coming to the winding up, let me put it very bluntly. Brexit is getting close. How do we do? I've got lots of good ideas. Therese Coffey mentioned the meaningful debate involved, which at the moment sounds anything but meaningful. That may be the end of it. We don't have years to talk about this. What are we actually doing to stop it?
Read the book by Nick Clegg.
Available from all good bookshops. And available here, there we go. But yeah, so what what can we do? What do we need to do? So campaigners, you have to think of what is your theory of change? How are you going to get to a new situation? And then you think about who are the people that you have to leverage to make that happen. So the only way that we're going to get an actual meaningful vote in Parliament, or a good result from that meaningful vote in Parliament, or a vote in Parliament that leads to a new referendum on the deal, is if MPs no longer feel curtailed by the last referendum result. The only way we're going to do that, as Tom Brake mentioned, opinion polls are really important to MPs. And there's a problem there because they're not shifting fast enough, despite the fact that Brexit is a clear disaster. People are still a bit like, I don't know whether this is all right. So it is shifting, and there is a consistent shift, and it's changing slowly, but it's 1% by 1% by 1%, and it's sort of bobbling around and whatnot. And it's still about 50-50, and there's a lot of don't knows. What we need is for it to be a clear, consistent, repeatable, across different opinion polls, YouGov, Opinion, Comrades, all the different ones, 55% of people against whatever. It doesn't need to be against Brexit full stop, just against the current form of Brexit, the current direction of Brexit, whether that's no deal or hard Brexit, whatever you want to call it. They want to be in dissent with the government's position. Ideally it would be 60%, because that would really motivate MPs. But yeah, so this is what we have to work towards. Now it is difficult, because a lot of the tabloids have this agenda, they're not seeing the shift yet, so they're sticking to their guns. If they saw that shift, as I say, a lot of them would begin to change. You would see the Times shift quite a lot. But, so what we need to do is try and work out how to get from the 50-50 split that we're on at the moment, in pretty much all the opinion polls, to a 55 clear, consistent, repeatable experiment. And that's tricky. But so we are joining together. We, Scientists for the EU and Health UN, are the same organisation anyway, pretty much, sort of sister organisations. But we've joined together with the European Movement, with a partnership agreement, and they've got one with Britain for Europe, so we're all a happy family now. As Tom Brake, I think, mentioned, the European Movement are also joining, sort of linking up, working better together with Open Britain and Vets for Britain. And so we are all based in London, we're all kind of pulling together. We're going to have more events. You guys are going to have more events. You're going to have to do your bit. You have to try and get 10% of people here to lend their voice to the dissent, the belligerent voice. We need to start, we need to have more direct contact with MPs, but you can write to your MP and say, well, I'm really not happy with you, and they'll say, yeah, but the opinion polls still show that I'm right and you're wrong, so shut up. And so that's not going to work initially, but it will begin to work over time, so if we can get opinions to shift a little bit. But so anyway, so we're all coming together, the Rain campaign finally beginning to unite, which is lovely. Take its time. We're going to be investing a lot in social media, because that you bypass the traditional media. So we're going to be investing in a lot of digital marketing, this kind of emotive, psycho-targeting stuff, just trying to reach out to people. And it's not about lying to them, it's about engaging them in a way that they feel like you're on the same wavelength to begin with, and then bringing them to the realities of Brexit in a way. So we're working on it, but groups like this really have a massive part to play, because you're the ones out in the streets speaking to people. I'm just sitting in an office on the laptop.
Sorry, I just want to say something here, sorry.
Yeah, say it loudly.
I mean, the only way that we can stop the process, and Barnley has been saying this ad nauseum, the clock is ticking. Britain is leaving on the 31st of March 2019 unless Article 50 is extended.
Yeah.
That is the fact.
Yeah. So can I just say this? We're coming to a close, and I want to thank the organisers, in particular Julia, for this event. And I want to say we have to start with ourselves. We have to, I think the slogan, the people must lead so that the leaders can follow, is something that we have to bear in mind. It all has to work. So first of all, we have to join and support the Suffolk EU Alliance and give time and energy. Secondly, we have to talk about these issues when we go to the supermarket, when we stand in the bus queue, when we have dinner with friends, all the time. We must do that work. And then thirdly, we've got to come to some agreement. What is the one thing we're asking for? And I think your question has been answered, which is the delay to Article 50, or to the repeal of the Article 50 process, which is possible constitutionally and even politically. So we need therefore to have consensus around it. On the basis of that, thank you very much, Julia, for all your work.
being challenged by the fact that Therese Coffey, who didn't want to come, who didn't want to speak, who didn't want to be on the platform, came, did all of that. And what I can say in response is I thank you for being on the Whitewater raft this morning and for understanding that in a democracy we can allow people to speak. What she told you very clearly was that she is not pro-Remain any longer because her post is really important to her. So if there's any takeaway today, it is that, because John Deben, in his long-term post, is in post and he is pro-Remain. But I'm not sure, particularly to you who are off Suffolk Coastal, that our MP is. It's about her and not about this. And that's really important. So thank you for coming. I think other colleagues have things to say. And thank you for sticking in there, because you've been here for hours.
Literally a minute of your time, please indulge me. Okay, I'm Philip Gordon, committee member of Suffolk EU Alliance. Thank you, Rob, fantastic speech. Thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to everybody who's contributed to a wonderful morning. A couple of things. Pick up a copy of this, please. If you don't read it already, it's great. I mean, it's slightly one-sided, I have to say. It has some great writers. And subscribe to it. Archant sent us 240 copies free. And, to Archant publish the East Anglian and the EDP, don't they? But they're prepared to do this sort of stuff. It's great stuff. Anyway, sorry the BBC didn't turn up. They've been distracted, and they weren't going to come here this morning with the film crew, Andrew Sinclair, but they've been distracted by the topical harassment stuff going on in Westminster, so they felt that they had to concentrate on that. So sorry they didn't turn up. And I just one couple more things. Anne was saying, I wear these badges. I wear various badges and things when I go out, just a little badge or something, and I engage with people when I'm out in public. If you don't wear that badge, you could be anybody. And I always have a reaction, and mostly positive. And we have to be visible. One of these merchandising companies, EU stuff, said, remain visible. I think that was some case. Anyway, wear these things and engage people on the streets. It all makes a difference. And finally, on behalf of the Suffolk EU Alliance Committee, I want to thank our tireless and inspirational chair, Julia Ewart, for